9. We can start with the meeting. I just want to welcome the department and minister and also the members. Member Kayla Mary said she was stuck in traffic, but she'll be here. I think within 5 minutes from now. And for the record purpose, and also to welcome all of you. My name is Matlodi Masego, the Chair for Standing Committee of Infrastructure. I'll ask the members to introduce themselves, and after to lead the department.
Good morning, Chair, and good morning to the Minister and the department. My name is Mesuli Gama. I'm alternate to the committee, and I will be representing the ANC today as a permanent member. Thanks.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning to the Minister, and good morning to the department from the highest to the lowest. My name is Mbulelo Isaac Sileko. I am the member of the committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister.
Thank you, Chairperson Tertia Simmers, Provincial Minister Infrastructure.
Good morning, Chair and members. Jackie Gooch, Head of Department Infrastructure.
Good morning, Chantal Smith. I'm the DDG for Finance.
Good morning, members. My name is Len Fourie. I'm the DDG for Roads.
Good morning, Gerrit van Skalkwyk, Head of Strategy.
Good morning, Gavin Code, DDG Public Works.
Good morning, Labika Skierman, DDG Human Settlements.
Good morning, Chairperson and members. Oyolo Tujalo, Head of Ministry.
Good morning, Chair and members. Ndobe Gombingilili, MLO to Minister Simmers.
Thank you very much. The members, before we continue, I just want to table the apology from Member Maran, who is now the alternate member. Mr. Ulkaman, Member Thomas, welcome. First time I didn't know you're an alternate. It's quite interesting. But welcome, and we're looking forward for the engagement you included for today. I'm not going to waste time. I'm just going to hand over to Minister and the HOD to lead us with a briefing on the focus points for the current financial year. Members, just a short brief. The reason why I saw this important for us to do this is that the Department of Infrastructure is such a huge portfolio. And surely for us to do the justice to the oversight role, we need to have a clarity of the focus point for the financial year so that when we engage throughout the year and also for the annual reports, we know that what were the focus points, and then it can do justice as you will be engaging with the department. And more so that we had a not such a nice transition from human settlements to the infrastructure. It was just the overnight that we had to just swim and be been thrown in the deep end. So we just want that reset button for us to be able to be, for you to take us with you to be part of the department, as we see ourselves as the family coming from human settlement, that we always never separated ourselves. We wanted the in-depth information and also to be taken step by step as you do what you do best in the department. So, Minister, I'm going to start with you and the HOD, and who is going to do the presentation? You'll just continue from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Chairperson. Once again, good morning to you and the Standing Committee, and also to Member Kama. Welcome to your first meeting where I'm present as an alternate member. Also the HOD and my DDGs, and also the Head of Ministry and the MLO. Chairperson, it's remarkable to think that we are actually now in the 5th month of the newly formed Department of Infrastructure. Clearly, time flies by. And while we are still in a transitional phase of our merger and in the process of commencing with phase 2 of the refresh program, our department has been hard at work outlining our strategic goals as set out in the 2050 Western Cape Infrastructure Framework. When I delivered the department's first budget vote, and I ultimately hosted an introductory post-budget business breakfast just to start introducing our new department, I must say that also led, in addition to the inaugural infrastructure summit we had to convene once again, so all our role players could actually understand where we were heading, given that for them this new department was something they really needed to understand. But Chairperson, it will be amiss of me not to state that we've actually been changing the tires on a driving bus the whole time in the 5 months as well. We haven't had time to do a pit stop even. I must be honest, because we are cognizant of the fact that given the multi-year nature of infrastructure and public transport and the contractual commitments binding us to both, there are inevitable pull-throughs of commitments from the two of our previous departments of Transport and Public Works and Roads and Human Settlements into our new department. That hence I said we've been changing the tires while this bus has actually been driving as well. But I do need to recognize and give recognition to the challenges which we also do face as a new department. Honorable Chairperson, I acknowledge first and foremost the multiple socio-economic challenges that residents face while they interact with the services that my department offers. We are stuck with a spatial legacy of apartheid, among other segregation and deprivation continues to be felt by most citizens and continues to manifest itself in the form of poverty, unemployment, inequality, and pervasive violence, like we saw recently with the taxi violence. The direct hindrances to spatial transformation sadly lie in the challenges experienced in realizing our integrated human settlements approach, which is the availability of well-located land and shortcomings in accessible public transport. The NDP suggests 4 key interventions to address spatial transformation. These actions broadly include densification, better located human settlements land, improved public transport, efficient location of jobs, and people improved spatial development frameworks, and a refreshed and diverse range of housing options. But key starting points for me to this discussion on infrastructure is to note the following. Infrastructure is, as HOD fondly reminds me, a public good, and the government plays a positive role in it, vis-a-vis electricity, water, roads, health, housing, education, waste management, and telecommunications. It has the positive spin-offs for all. We all like to focus on that. Households, communities, businesses, industries, tourism, or the attraction part thereof, and could foster economic growth, employment opportunities, and a lot of other spin-offs, which I will not mention. But the maintenance of infrastructure, the planning thereof, and the financing thereof is a challenge in the context of declining budgets and rising unemployment in our country. This province is not exempt from that. The breakdown in overall logistics due to non-functioning state-owned enterprises further stifles the economy and public infrastructure. And in recent years, the integrity of our road infrastructure across our province has had to bear the brunt of this misfortune. But as much as I've outlined the challenges, Honorable Chair, I will just quickly focus on our bedrock document, which is what drives our new department, which is the 2050 Western Cape Infrastructure Framework. This framework has been developed to address these challenges I've highlighted, but also to ensure that we accelerate the development and unlock the region's economic potential to its maximum as far as is humanly possible. The framework is certainly by no means, Honorable Chairperson, a silver bullet. I must put that upfront to you in the standing committee, but it's a partnership-based approach to deal with the challenges because government can't do this alone. We just do not have the financial capacity. But this will guide us in the following objectives. As I stated, we need to contribute to economic growth and jobs. Infrastructure plays a massive role in that. We need to maximize the economic and social benefits of our infrastructure projects, but once again, for all of our citizens and all the sectors that fall within our portfolio. At the end of the day, it needs to benefit the citizen of the Western Cape, something which we've picked up in certain communities, they feel they are not part of the change that infrastructure brings to their communities. Given that we are facing massive fiscal challenges, crowdsource infrastructure investment and co-investment from the private sector with a broad-based cost-benefit consideration is also part of the framework's focus. But like I said, we are busy driving the bus while changing the wheel. We also needed to align to existing plans and structures in the public sector and the private sector, because we do want to foster that partnership and expand on it. But we also need to demonstrate innovation, future planning, which is something the former Transport and Public Works is well known for, and an integrated approach to infrastructure growth. For me, the emphasis is integrated, given the fiscal environment we are in. Honorable Chairperson, by placing people or the citizen at the center of our operations, and yeah, I include our staff as well as our external citizens across our province, the department is advocating a systems thinking approach that assists us in how we do planning, how planning is structured from a citizen-centric point of view, and changes the way that performance is measured from a traditional output measurement to a more nuanced measurement of impact in terms of our communities. And for me as the minister and the team, the desired impact puts people in the center, with the impact being measured to the effect the programs had or will have on the lives of our people and their intended beneficiaries, with the following key outcomes for me: an infrastructure foundation and capability for development, sustained delivery for maximum impact where we do deliver these services and projects, leveraging infrastructure to bring about fundamental spatial transformation, which is still needed in our country, and a catalyst for innovation, private sector development, and climate-sensitive infrastructure. Honorable Chair, in conclusion, and without delving too deep into our basket of offerings, I will now hand over to our HOD and the team to present on the journey moving forward. Because like you've rightfully said, this is a massive department and we do a lot, not in terms of the tangible infrastructure, but also the intangible infrastructure, because this interweaves to how we plan to build, to think about the future together. Thank you, HOD.
Through you, Chair, thank you very much. So the presentation is visible. I think there were copies handed out. And to start, as Minister is already taking us into some of the focus areas in the future, one of the things that's important to understand for us as a Department of Infrastructure is also where we're coming from. What is it that we're responding to within South Africa? And the South African Institution of Civil Engineers produces every 5 years or so an infrastructure report card. And their latest one that was produced for 2022 outlines and assesses various types of infrastructure across South Africa. And where they have placed some of the key infrastructure for which we, of course, are either responsible and or need to have some interaction with is within the paved roads. That is countrywide, sitting at an overall category in terms of performance at category D. In other words, what's considered to be at risk of failure. That is countrywide. It is noted in the report that this is with the exception of the Western Cape. So, of course, the Western Cape Provincial paved network is certainly not sitting at an overall category D in terms of risk of failure. But as Minister has mentioned, and we can provide further, far more detailed briefings to the committee on the state of the road network from the plans that we have. And then, of course, our unpaved roads countrywide sits at a level E, unfit for purpose. Now, our schools countrywide and health facilities, which of course are a range from clinics to tertiary hospitals and secondary hospitals and things, sit between a category C and D. But overall, I think the takeaway from the infrastructure report card that's important for the committee and that feeds into the work of this department and how we position the department is that infrastructure report card from SAICI says what's required, and they focus on 3 clear areas. The first one is people and relationships, and it's about having the sufficient numbers of appropriate skills. And you'd well know the difficulty, even from your work with oversight of human settlements, how important it is to have appropriate skill sets in the right places, that they understand what their responsibilities are, and that we're able to work on a collaborative basis between the public and private sector when we're delivering infrastructure, as ministers mentioned. The institutional robustness is necessary. And so that's talking about the clear mandates, knowing who's accountable for what, having the necessary policies and governance systems in place, which of course from a government point of view is very important, and something that as a standing committee, you particularly are looking at those types of systems from an oversight perspective. And then data and information. And certainly from our point of view, and you'll see it coming through as a department, that we focus on trying to understand what is the asset base that we have, what is its age, what is its condition, what is its performance in terms of the asset, because that then determines what it is that we need to look at into the future. And it starts to talk about, as ministers mentioned, the type of financial resources and partnerships and things that one needs to have in place in order to identify different solutions to respond to the challenges that we have. So just holding that in the back of your mind around the state of infrastructure for the country and understanding then the Western Cape. We moved into this new financial year, and as you mentioned, Chair, in your opening comments, as a result of the refresh process within the government, we've taken the Department of Transport and Public Works and the Department of Human Settlements, and those two departments ceased to exist, and we now have two new departments from the 1st of April, the Department of Infrastructure and the Mobility Department. And if we look at vote numbers, historically, Transport and Public Works was vote 10. The Department of Infrastructure is now a new vote 10. And what was vote 8 for Human Settlements is now the Mobility Department is now vote 8. So just to connect back into the budget terminologies for you. Ministers already mentioned that in the infrastructure space and the public transport aspects that sit, as well as in, of course, from Human Settlements, which is infrastructure driven, there are commitments of projects, of work, of programs that carry through from the previous departments into the new departments that need to be funded. They need to continue, not only because of potential legal risks or legal requirements from a contractual perspective, but of course potential reputational risks, that if you just suddenly stop something, there are potential reputational risks. So those things have to continue from the previous departments into the two new departments. And we've mentioned that there are also at times risks, because you're carrying risks as departments, whether it's the state of infrastructure, whether it's the backlogs that you have, those also find their way into the new departments. Now, you might recall when we had the briefing around the budget and the APP for the new Department of Infrastructure, there was an indication to the Standing Committee that there is a management arrangement in place for the administration program, so for those support functions that couldn't be divided up with the time that we had for the refresh process. So those still sit with a management arrangement embedded at this point within the Department of Infrastructure, and then need to be split by, and it's indicated the end of October, between the Mobility Department and the Infrastructure Department. So that work is underway for that capacity from an administration perspective, the finance capacity, strategy capacity, etc. Those things are then being split out between the two departments. And then Minister mentioned the next phase of refresh, which is to try to optimize the work of the two new departments and what organizational structures will be required to do that. That is work that will be commencing. So to give you a sense, just I suppose a reminder, and this committee would know well what sat within the Department of Human Settlements from a budget program perspective. You had the administration program. Program 2 was the housing needs research and planning. Program 3 being housing development, and 4 being housing and asset management. Those were the budget programs that existed in Human Settlements. And in Transport and Public Works, we had 6 budget programs, again, administration, public works infrastructure, transport infrastructure, transport operations, transport regulation, and then community-based programs. So those were the 6 budget programs in TPW. What you now have, and in theory, if you could imagine the slides moving and the kind of areas moving, within infrastructure, we have our administration program, We have the public works infrastructure, transport infrastructure, and human settlements is now a program within the department. And what was its programs are now sub-programs within infrastructure. And then you've got community-based programs or expanded public works. And just for completeness, of course, the mobility department sits with administration, transport operations, transport regulation, and the trading entity of government motor transport is also vested then within that department. So if we now delve the next step into the Department of Infrastructure for 23-24 in terms of the current financial year, as you would recall, we sit with an appropriation of just over 9.8 billion rand for the Department of Infrastructure, and we've identified 4 core objectives at this point. The first is the infrastructure foundation and the capability for the department. Sustained delivery for maximum impact. You can pick up some of the points that Minister has mentioned coming through from the infrastructure framework. Leveraging infrastructure to bring about the fundamental spatial transformation, and then focusing on catalyzing innovation, the private sector development, and responding from a climate change perspective with climate sensitive infrastructure. So you'd recall from the budget process that this is the breakdown of the budgets across the various programs for the department. The administration program sitting with 319 million. And just a reminder that the full budget for the management arrangement was split between mobility and infrastructure, but the management arrangement staff is all sitting with infrastructure and still needs to be shifted up. So the budget was split. And so when we get to the adjustments budget time, there's going to be a lot of movements needing to happen between the mobility department and the infrastructure department in order to try to get everything aligned properly. So just a heads up, when we get to you can expect a fair amount of complexity in the adjustments budget between votes 8 and vote 10. Public works infrastructure, 2.2 billion. Transport infrastructure, 4.5, human settlements, 2.6 billion, and then the community-based programs, EPWP, at 68 million. And I'll speak to each of those in a little more detail in some upcoming slides. Then just to also give you an idea, as it stands with the MTEF, and of course we all know that the future looks a little bit bleaker than what was put forward when we first did the budget, but this is just to give you a sense of what currently sits within the budget across the department. And you'll see then the split between the budget programs of the various share of the program. Now, roads infrastructure, of course, sits in the current financial year with 46.4% of the budget, human settlements 26.4%, public works 23.2%, the administration program at 3%, and community-based programs at just shy of 1%. And if you have a look at the program allocations in terms of the growth across the MTEF, of course, what is concerning for what was put on the table from the 23-24 MTEF is that there's practically no growth, the nominal growth. And when you add real inflation into that, is that your budgets are going backwards for all intents and purposes, right? So your nominal average annual growth over the MTEF, and even with infrastructure, transport infrastructure, you actually see sits at a negative 5.7%. So you are ultimately going backwards. And within certain sectors, particularly the construction industry, your inflation numbers are even higher than standard inflation. So it ultimately means that you're going to have a worse situation when you're looking at an infrastructure environment based upon just the budgets that are here for the Department of Infrastructure, which is why the point about needing to create partnerships, look at other models for funding and financing and so on, is vitally important for this particular department. If I then speak about the organizational thrusts and just try to give you a picture for this year and moving into the MTEF, it starts, as Minister's mentioned, with the strategic direction coming from the infrastructure framework. So we say infrastructure isn't something that you just build for tomorrow. When you do invest in it, it's something that you're intending to have around for years to come. And therefore, you do need to understand what the future holds. You are going to be thinking about how your infrastructure delivery, how its design needs to change with what the future may hold. So what does artificial intelligence mean? What does 3D printing mean? Alternative building technologies? What does the future look like for education? And what is that education system going to be, and what therefore infrastructure is required to respond to that, and the same with healthcare, etc. So that strategic direction with a view to 2050 is vitally important. Then you'd recall I had in the opening slide around the South African Institution of Civil Engineers report card, aspects around governance, and the frameworks and the systems are important for this department. And that means that you need to be able to, with that in place, manage risk, but also take opportunities as they present themselves within the framework that is set. So managing the refresh phase 2 and the restructuring that will come about in terms of that, in responding to the strategic imperatives and the requirements from a people perspective. And you recall I said having appropriate skills in place is vitally important when we're talking about infrastructure delivery. So all of those aspects are necessary to have in place in order to make sure that we can consolidate as a department, make sure it's stable, and then exponentially increase the delivery that is envisaged and that's required. That is, of course, particularly important because of the kind of pressures that are coming into the system. So the demands that are being placed on infrastructure, not only in relation to the need to deliver to more people. So as we have in-migration and semi-migration into the Western Cape and through the Western Cape, there's those future demands. There is the demand being placed on the infrastructure portfolio itself from a maintenance perspective, being able to try to keep that infrastructure portfolio at particular performance standards, which is difficult, health and safety standards, which of course also, as you have a declining fiscus and pressures from a financial perspective, you have to start to make very difficult choices about where you direct your funds. The input cost pressures that we've mentioned around the building materials, diesel, as we know, going up suddenly is a massive input and driver. If you're thinking about the infrastructure sector, your machinery, equipment is all generally diesel operated, let alone if you're thinking about public works and load shedding responses, trying to keep diesel generators running as a first point is something that's important. And then as municipalities increase their valuations from a property point of view, the property rates, because remember public works and of course human settlements pay property rates to municipalities, that is quite an increased cost driver for us. At this point, I think it's about 17% in the current financial year in terms of increases. So that is something that you can't do without. You can't suddenly not pay property rates to municipalities. And then, of course, the legislative and regulatory environment, as the procurement environment changes, as the environmental legislation changes, all of those impact on the delivery elements of a Department of Infrastructure. And remembering that infrastructure is a long-term thing, it is quite difficult to suddenly change course and track as new things are added into the system. So the Department of Infrastructure, from an establishment perspective, of course, when we appeared before the Standing Committee with our budget and our EPP, we also had a first strategic plan because the department needs to have a strategic plan as well. And the vision that was captured is one that comes through with the infrastructure framework, is to have an enabled infrastructure-led growth, and that speaks to growth for jobs strategy of this province, and investment for the Western Cape that will benefit the communities we serve. That's the vision for the Department of Infrastructure. And it comes through, as I say, with the objectives, and Minister's mentioned those in his opening remarks, so I'm not going to repeat them, but it speaks to then the various infrastructure sectors that the infrastructure framework is wanting to respond to, and that the Department of Infrastructure, you would recall, is also starting to pick up on particularly energy as a new sector, with budgets that were allocated for certain projects that the Department of Infrastructure would be undertaking for the Western Cape government. So Ministers mentioned the infrastructure framework and some of the key focus areas. Just on this slide, we've tried to give you a sense of some of the detail within that in terms of what it captures. So when we're looking at infrastructure for maximum impact, it's not only about implementing the framework, it's about leveraging the partnerships with Infrastructure South Africa, the entity at a national level that links the National Department of Public Works and Infrastructure and the presidency with the National Development Plan, the National Infrastructure Plan as well. Bringing large infrastructure projects to market, looking at norms and standards, and of course, responding to the aspects of spatial transformation and considering what are the projects that we can be delivering on as a province and how do we influence others with municipalities and other spheres of government and the private sector. The infrastructure framework also, of course, picks up municipal infrastructure because actually, unless municipal infrastructure is functioning properly, anything even that the province delivers has to work on the municipal base. So it's about picking up the status quo analysis, working with the Department of Local Government, of course, in that realm, and other departments to be able to understand what that particular situation is, and then working around the funding and the collaboration models and determining appropriate interventions. So one is able to then look at and respond to water infrastructure, the bulk services that are necessary, the human settlement delivery in terms of housing and the various programs are intimately required to have the bulk services in place. And we see how projects are delayed until we have bulk services available in order for that to occur. Even health facilities and education facilities, until there's connections on the bulk system in place, that those things are delayed. So it's actually very important that these things are tied up and work together. The private sector partnerships, Minister mentioned, we don't have the types of budgets at a provincial level that are necessary to respond to the infrastructure requirements that we have in order to support growth. You have to have partnerships with private sector, but that means that there are different procurement models that we need to work on. At times, the stock standard approaches are quite risky, and one needs to be able to respond and say, for example, as you well know, unsolicited bids are something that government goes, hang on a sec, not a chance. We want to steer clear because there are risks involved. There are risks when you might recall in the run up to 2010 with the World Cup infrastructure, when there was then potential and actual real findings against collusion and so on across companies. But when you're talking about trying to bring the private sector on the table, you need to be able to do so in an open way in order to understand how you can bring them in as a partner, but without putting anybody at risk in that particular process. And that's something that needs a lot of work with the provincial treasury, the national treasury, and this department. If one looks at innovation and future planning, the aspects you would have heard us speak about and this department would certainly want to continue to focus on is the elements about in-house construction, innovation, research and development. From a roads perspective, this is something that we've been building on over the years historically from Transport and Public Works. And I believe that the Department of Infrastructure needs to carry on with that. It's about having that kind of capability. It allows you to respond when there's a crisis. It allows you to respond when there is flood damage. When something happens, you're able to be on site and get there and do something to open up and provide access. So that in-house construction and the capability that it provides for you to test things, to train things, historically, government was the training ground for engineers, for operators, and that's where people can learn. The private sector can't necessarily afford to take those risks. Government actually can and should in many areas to test new things, test new technologies, new equipment and opportunities. And that's where you can do that through in-house construction. Of course, responding to climate change, building in the types of resilient strategies and the design and our delivery and how we manage infrastructure and operate, it's important. So even things like alternative building technologies, different materials, when you're thinking about housing and human settlement delivery, those are things that come into different types of materials. And of course, moving the province eventually along with the country to a net zero carbon is vitally important in that context. So for the department, across each of the programs and the various focus areas. So this is where perhaps to give you a sense of what comes from TPW, and of course, because you know human settlement, so some of those aspects that come together into the new Department of Infrastructure. We've got the governance arrangements that we've spoken about earlier, the management of the interim management arrangements, strengthening of supply chain and the finance capability and capacity being important, particularly within the understanding of the infrastructure environment. You'd recall we've been provided with funding for certain energy projects within the Department of Infrastructure, and those are currently, that budget is sitting within Program 1 with a team that is seconded to us from the Department of Economic Development and Tourism to assist on project preparation, facilities, support to certain municipalities for transaction advisory services, project management services, and so on. And then there are particular projects under what used to be Triple P, but it's now been renamed the Economic Hub in order to respond to spatial transformation. So this is where your projects like Founders Garden, Leolua, Stikland, Conradi, etc., are being driven from, and others that are in the pipeline. And the connection, of course, back into what is Program 2, Public Works with the Asset Register and the Immovable Asset Management team. And of course, because Program 1 contains strategy, policy capabilities, that's where the Infrastructure Framework 2050 finalization will be driven from. Program 2, which is Provincial Public Works, has a big focus on resource management and efficiency. So historically, through the Office Modernization Program and others, with a focus on being able to manage the different utilities, so water, energy, space. We've produced, I think it's now 11 property efficiency reports. The 12th one is underway and should be published before the end of the year. And the property efficiency report is something where we each year analyze and ultimately then cost and monitor what the space utilization is of a particular part of the property portfolio. We started to include some schools in the last one, as well as some of the health facilities. So space utilization, water consumption, energy consumption, and building by building, so that you can then provide reports back to the users and, of course, Public Works to be able to see, are there any outliers? Are there any anomalies? Have we got water leaks? Is there something going on? So that the team are able to respond. So again, if that's something that the committee may be interested in getting a particular briefing about that work, it's very interesting, and there's been a lot of investment, and it's something that I believe the Western Cape government can be proud of. The National Department of Public Works and Infrastructure is now going out to tender for services in order to try to start to understand what's going on across their portfolio and trying to improve, etc. And this is something we've been doing as a government for many, many years. So again, it may be something that the committee is interested in. Looking at the Master Office Accommodation Plan, because of course we're the custodian of the immovable asset portfolio. So in terms of the Government Immovable Asset Management Act, the department is the custodian. It has to produce a custodian asset management plan based upon the user asset management plans of various departments. Then I've already mentioned about energy efficiency, but something new just to let the committee know that it's come in. One could argue it's an unfunded mandate. Everybody loves to talk about unfunded mandates, and this one comes from national government to us, where we are required to have energy performance certificates for properties over a certain square meterage, if I remember correctly, 1,000 square meters. And that energy performance certificate has to be produced by somebody who's certified to do it and kind of audited and so on, and that costs us. There was almost a stay of execution a little bit. There was a last ditch from national government delay in terms of by when it had to be implemented, but we have already started, and we've already started getting a few of these, and we're doing it based upon what we can afford within our baseline, but we certainly weren't provided with any additional funding for it. And therefore there is a risk in this department from a financial perspective and from a compliance perspective in terms of national legislation for us to be able to achieve this. Of course, maintenance of the existing portfolio is a key point and responsibility for Program 2, And then, notwithstanding, almost taken for granted, the delivery of infrastructure, health, education, we're the implementing agent for certain of the infrastructure for health and education, and then, of course, the general infrastructure team. Then program 3, roads infrastructure. Their focus for us and for the department is the continued maintenance and improvement of the provincial road network, trying to focus on particular infrastructure projects that would unlock economic growth and opportunity. So the team have been advocating and trying to access funding through the BFI, but to no avail yet for some particular projects, N1, N7, which is a particular integrator and the replacement of the N1, N7 interchange and a whole network of roads that are necessary that also support public transport with the City of Cape Town. And that's a 10 billion rand project with massive economic opportunities that would come through as a result of it. But unfortunately, we've not been successful to be able to access national funding for it, notwithstanding even Infrastructure South Africa supporting us in that process. Unfortunately, we've received recently an indication from the National Treasury that it won't be supported through the BFI because we're not implementing a user pay principle, which in other words is toll roads. And it's something that we're not advocating for, and therefore they've indicated no. Within roads, of course, a core part and their focus is to maintain what we have. As we've mentioned, we don't have sufficient money to maintain our network at the level that's required. The team can provide to the committee a detailed briefing around the road asset management plan. Every year there is a road asset management plan that is produced. It is a 10-year plan, and it takes account of what the current state of the network is. It then identifies what are the projects that are needed based upon the resources that we have in order to respond to the critical parts of the network and the projects. And really what the team are trying to do is, as responsibly as possible, manage the network within the limited resources that we have. And then, of course, building the skills and keeping the kind of skills that are necessary in the road infrastructure space, transport infrastructure. Minister would know some of the conversations that are held with other provinces around whether you've got professional engineers, professional technologists in the right places, in the right positions to be able to manage and be responsible and sign off what is necessary. And this province is lucky that it does have that, and it has a program that picks up out of program 5, the Masaki Sizwe bursary program, where we support youth to be able to study in the built sector. And then there's a connection back to program 3 to roads, where once people graduate from the universities, they are brought in, work, supported to get their professional registration. And then hopefully we're able to, within the limited COE, advertise positions and be able to recruit and then retain those that we've actually trained up. In program 4, that's the one that the committee would be very knowledgeable of, human settlements as the program. And the focus, of course, about leveraging human settlement infrastructure so we can also bring about spatial transformation across the Western Cape and the various municipalities, support the municipalities to execute the human settlements programs. That's looking at planning, the municipal pipeline, which of course is important, and providing technical assistance around the packaging of projects. Then the social housing program, development of permanent affordable rental opportunities, and that is something that, as you know, the department is very passionate about, and overall the provision of the various types of programs in the housing code that need to be delivered through program 4. Then program 5, EPWP, or community-based, is the title in terms of the formal naming convention of the program, where this is the team that is responsible to coordinate EPWP in the province. So they're responsible to work with the municipalities, ensure that the various reporting bodies are reporting in on the national EPWP system. for the province to achieve the targets that are set for EPWP work opportunities. So this is the team that coordinated. They are not responsible for making sure the opportunity is delivered. It's the municipality or the relevant department or working with the National Department of Public Works and Infrastructure that link back to the social sector, the environmental sector, the NGO sectors, and so on. So that's the team there. They are also the team that can be called upon by municipalities and other implementing agents and bodies to try to provide some assistance and ideas of how to improve delivery and upscale EPWP opportunities across various programs. They are also the team in program 5. There's a team that's responsible for our skills development and empowerment programs. And in this group, it's the team that roll out some of our artisan programs, the National Youth Service. They are the team that work on the contractor development program and provide support, bring in mentors to connect smaller contractors with higher graded contractors to be able to support them through that particular program. And then this is also the one tool that as a department, I think we can be incredibly proud of. And I think is something that we have been able to do very well is we produce an empowerment impact assessment. So we have a guideline where we produce an empowerment impact assessment for projects that are over 10 million rand now. And that empowerment impact assessment considers what are the opportunities in the area for that particular infrastructure project. So this is in the planning and design phase before it gets to tender. There is this empowerment impact assessment that's done to then determine what are the possibilities for sourcing labor from the particular area. What are the skill sets that are here? What are the types of suppliers in this local area? So can you then put percentage targets into your tender for the contractor to respond to be able to source materials, labor, SMME, subcontractors and so on from certain areas where that infrastructure project is being delivered. Percentages are put in as targets into the tender. The contractor, of course, then from a line function point of view, responds to the tender, and there's a monitoring of those particular goals then through the delivery of the project. Now, what that then means is that we don't have set asides. You're not saying only X sector can tender. Our CFO will tell you that that's, for all intents and purposes, from a supply chain and procurement perspective, that's not allowed, but you can bring in those are the requirements, the participation requirements that the tenderer responds to then in their tender. And this is something that we've been advocating, and a number of the provinces are starting to take up. Even Gauteng recently asked for our empowerment impact assessment guidelines because they're interested in trying to learn from that and bring that into their processes. So again, something that I think that this province can be incredibly proud of. I've mentioned the Misaki Sizwe bursary program, so that's issuing bursaries as well as then the professional development that goes with it in links to program 3 for the roadside and to program 2, and of course now starting to integrate that also with the human settlements program around a number of the graduates. So you can start to see some of the benefits of pulling the teams together into a Department of Infrastructure. Chair, I'm nearing the end. I know I've been speaking a lot, but I thought you wanted to get a bit of a sense of the content. So nearing the end of the presentation now, to give you a bit of a sense of the thrust, both internal and external, that the department needs to be considering from 2023 into the MTEF beyond. So just to give you a sense of some of what's coming down the pipeline for us, of course. That internally, there's the refresh and the change management from a transition point of view that it's important that the Department of Infrastructure focuses on. There are, of course, compensation of employee budget constraints. You would well know, even nationally now with the wage agreements, there's immediately pressure placed on the COE budgets because there isn't additional allocations that have come through. And that means that for a department such as this, even though our compensation of employees is low, I think it's at what, 10, 11%, 12%, contribute 10 to 12% out of our total budget, which is actually very small in comparison to many other departments, because of course the bulk of our budget is aimed for delivery. It's the delivery money. which then means that if you're cutting or you've got curtailed COE, you are immediately impacting on the people that you need in order to make sure that the infrastructure is being implemented, that it has oversight over those projects, oversight over the contracts, management of those things, which is important because you want infrastructure delivered on time, on budget, right quality. And that means that you have to have people to do that. And then some of those elements, as we've mentioned, just closing out certain of the phase 1 aspects from refresh and moving into phase 2. On the external side, there is a high demand for infrastructure, high demand for services that the infrastructure needs to be providing, and we have limited supply. We have the dichotomy between building new versus maintaining what we have because of the pressures. If you think about it in an education space, we've got substantial pressures with learners coming into the system each year, which necessitates then more classrooms, in other words, new build, but you actually don't even have enough money to maintain what we have. So you're always sitting with that particular pressure. CPI I've mentioned, and of course procurement and other legislation. So for us as a department, our objective from a budget point of view was moving from recovery to growth, looking and responding to the objectives of the growth for jobs, and infrastructure is a core part of that, of course. And there are specific immediate constraints, of course, that we've got short-term interventions that have been identified to be able to respond to, and then the infrastructure framework that is setting out all the way through from short-term, medium, and into the long-term for the future. And then the final slide, Chair, is just to understand that when it comes to infrastructure, one of the things that we've advocated for a long time is that while we're working on 3-year budget cycles, infrastructure is longer than that. Infrastructure planning, tendering, delivering usually, and I'm not talking about a small maintenance project, but I'm talking about, substantial infrastructure is longer than a 3-year MTEF cycle. And at times is even longer than a 5-year cycle. The lady you will see as the head of roads has been around for many, many years, will tell you, well, in the 1980s, 1990s, this was the thought in terms of a road, and you're finally getting around to doing it in 2010, 2020s, 2030s, because you do have to plan for the future. You have to plan for expansion. That's one of the key things around infrastructure. Now, on the basis that we've been advocating that you need long-term and a greater degree of certainty when it comes to infrastructure. You can't budget and plan where budgets are going up and down all the time for infrastructure. And we've always been told, well, the future is uncertain. So we've had long-term uncertainty. But what is starting to happen now, and you would have seen it and you've been briefed from a budget point of view, you're getting that uncertainty coming closer and closer and closer now into the 3-year cycle and now even into the immediate term, just because even if you take the COE aspects of what's happened in the current financial year, it means you've got problems that you have to respond to. Of course, you've got low investment confidence and even the construction sector, and more construction companies are battling. So one of the big ones now, of course, that's in the news and that the government is having to respond to is Grinica. That has got a big exposure. The Western Cape government has got a big exposure to Grinica, particularly the Department of Education. We've had with some projects, and as Grinica is now going, and in trouble, that has a direct impact on your ability to deliver. And you've got to figure out how do you respond. That means certain projects have to stop, or what is it that you do? So as the broader economic environment becomes more difficult, that impacts on your construction companies. Your big ones and your small ones. Your big ones are then not paying your small ones who are subcontractors to them, or it means then that your big ones who, even if they are paying, there's less work for them, there are fewer projects for them, and that means that your smaller contractors at times are also not getting the work that they used to get. So we've listed some of the risks and the potential negative impacts as well, which are important. But all of this, while there are risks and the negative impact, the aspect for us to understand within an infrastructure environment is how do you turn all of those things into other types of opportunities? Where do you redirect your focus? How do you build the partnerships that we're talking about in order to mitigate some of these things? But certainly as a standing committee and from a briefing point of view, then from my perspective, it's also around saying, right, what are those opportunities? How can we assist and support the department in performing oversight to be able to explore the different things that exist? So yes, there are these kind of negative and potential risks, but how do we start the conversations and start to ask the questions through the oversight and with other entities to be able to create the kind of connections that are necessary to further the delivery and the opportunities that infrastructure can bring for the Western Cape government. The final part, Chair, is just to give you, I suppose, taking a bit of a being opportunistic to let you know, given what's coming ahead, we're already aware of the severe weather events that we've experienced, and that immediately means that for the Department of Infrastructure, immediately resources are redirected because they have to be to respond to the immediate needs, to make sure that there's access, etc. And that potentially then programs and work that you had programmed in your normal day in terms of your usual program is impacted. So as a result, you divert resources, and that means some of your targets that you've set from your APP point of view, you now are not going to meet. On the human settlement side, you'd be well aware National has increased the subsidy quantum, which is welcome. And of course, changes again within the delivery environment. There have been 3 provincial indicators that were previously linked in for the Department of Infrastructure that have been scrapped. And after the tabling of the APP and the budget, in the terms of timeframes, because with a new Department of Infrastructure and a mobility department, there was then feedback from the Department of the Premier about the technical indicator descriptors that are part of that APP. And so there's some adjustments there that will come through when the department tables its adjustments budget. And it will need to make some a revision in terms of the annual performance plan and submit to the standing committee. So just a bit of an early warning. Given the nature of infrastructure, it's something that the committee, I'm sure you're well versed with from human settlements, but certainly you will find nothing different, if not potentially increased with particularly roads, and then of course in the public works space. Chair, that's it from my side, and the team and I are happy to answer any questions in detail. Thank you very much.
Thank you, HOD. Oh, that was a lot to take in. So you're going to bear with us to be where you are. Members, I am going to open for the questions, but it's so cold in here. Or is it me? It's me? Oh, okay, you are hot. Okay. I'll take it. I'm going to, I was thinking that we're going to take just a 5 minutes body break so that all of us can catch a cup of coffee. There is a coffee there, and then you come in, then we can engage nicely. So already the department is saying yes. So if we can do that, and then now it's 9:57. That means 10. How many minutes? I didn't do. I did both mass, not the solve for exam.
But what was?
Yeah, 10 past.
10 past.
Yeah, can we do 10%? Okay, there is something to keep you warm in the members' lounge. There we can go and then we'll come back. Let's adjourn for now. Thank you very much. Welcome again, and we did the presentation. So I'm going to open up for the questions, members. Member Kayla being the first.
Thank you. I have so many questions, but I'll keep it to 3.
Listen, I'm not going to stop you, but knowing you, take 3 at a time.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
So with regards to slide 3, work underway and the new program 1, interim management arrangement. I understand that refresh has been has been a concern for members of the administration. And so I just wanted to understand what the refresh process has been, noting that you are now vote 8 and not votes 10 and 8 anymore. Oh, vice versa. Okay, sorry. Having a moment there. All right, so I just wanted to understand what the refresh process has been in amalgamating these 2 departments, whether there were any job losses or what engagement has there been with the administration and trade unions. Then, Chair, my next question is I am not really sure on how this works, but I understand that the department can take intervention when municipalities are not delivering in terms of infrastructure projects, if that's correct. If you could take me through that, and I could understand that a little bit better. You also mentioned, for example, I think it was the empowerment impact assessment, yes. And if that also in any way ties in with kind of holding municipalities to account for the infrastructure projects that they have to deliver on. And then, Chair, I think for my final question, I'm really interested in the strategic organizational thrusts. I think it's really cool that you guys are being so future focused into 2050. And I did note the comment that while private sector doesn't necessarily have the capacity to look at innovation and future planning, that the department does have more so. And so what is the budget for this and which program does that sit with? What sort of innovation here are we talking about? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I won't be long as my height. Just in terms of the anticipation of the interim management arrangement that will be dissolved latest the end of October in this particular year, do you foresee any problems that the dissolution might not happen as per the envisaged date of the end of October 2023? That's the first question. Is there anything that can prohibit that happening? And secondly, Chair, when one looks in terms of the programs, and we go specifically to program 4, when you look at program 4, then the function itself, it's very huge. And then it's going to be, there will be sub-programs now in terms of what you want to achieve in terms of human settlements. And we had our last briefing in terms of the performance in terms of human settlements. And there was a lot of issues raised there and risk and challenges as well. Now it's not a function on its own, it's part of a program which is going to have sub-programs. Is there any challenges that you foresee as a Department of Infrastructure when it comes to program 4 that might affect the performance of this particular program? That might affect the performance of this particular program. That's the second question. Also, Chair, I also understand that in terms of the role of department maybe the department just need to expand in terms of what is its role when it comes to the expanded public works. Expanded public works in the sense of it's implemented at municipal level, what role do you play as a department on the municipal level in making sure that EPWP it's not abused, EPWP it's not used by politicians? And why I say that, maybe let me try to explain what I'm trying to get at, Chair. In most instances, you'll find that the program, the EPWP itself is allocated in the office of a particular mayor. And when it comes to the appointment of EPWPs, that politicians have a say in who they appoint. They don't advertise. They send SMSs to individuals. As a result, they hold those individuals to ransom, saying that we appoint you on an EPWP for a period of 6 months. During weekends, you must go and do membership for our organization. It's happening. And I think that is abuse. And then one would want to know, how does one close the tap and make sure that the most vulnerable that are unemployed, that want an opportunity to be employable as the objects of EPWP? Because you must be given a skill so that there must be an exit strategy. But currently what is happening, we are not actually achieving what we want to achieve in terms of EPWP. I just want the department to elaborate and make sure if it's aware of that, and how does one actually just address such issues. Those are three for me. Thank you very much.
Kida?
Thank you, Chair, for your indulgence. You just started a fire in me there. So just one little question. One thing I've noticed in my constituency, particularly in the area of Joe Slovo, is, and I know that this is a municipal function, but I wanted to understand maybe what is done with EPWP provincially. So there are EPWP allocated to assist with waste management in Joe Slovo, but many of the community members complain that those EPWP workers don't come from the area. And when I inquired to try and find out how is this, because my understanding is that they must come from the community, what I found was that it's quite easy for people to put in the wrong address or an address that is in Joe Slovo, and be approved and be allowed to work in the community. And that in turn creates a lot of frustration. And so I wanted to understand as well what sort of auditing is maybe taken to confirm, or vetting to confirm, that people reside within the areas that they are claiming to come from, and if there's any best practice that could be handed over to the city or to other municipalities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think members, you need to highlight this. The department itself, they're just coordinators of the EPWP. Implementing agents are those municipalities. So the information that you talk about and any other facts of who's going to be hired, that's not where they get involved. The municipality that gets involved. Maybe the question we have to ask about the EPWP is the issue of the due diligence to make sure that they can hold the municipalities accountable with what they say they're going to do. Because before the allocation for the financial year, they have to say, are they going to use that money for the waste management side, and who's going to be there? And so if maybe there is a policy attached to that when you do the allocation of that, then that's when they can come in. But the final details, like in your constituency, the municipality will be the one that can be able to answer, not the department per se. But I think they will do the clarity there so that we don't go far. Member Kama?
No, thank you very much, Chair, and to the department for the presentation. Let me thank you, Chair. I think the presentation was an opportunity to bring me up to speed with what is happening in the department. As well, I think I only have one question, because I think every time when I hear the minister in the house talking about infrastructure development, there's one particular risk that is always mentioned, which is the construction mafia. And as one continues to put his head around this, I was thinking that, but how do we bring that sense to the community that this is your infrastructure that will benefit you? And now I heard when the HOD that when she was speaking that there is some impact assessment that they do, where they check how many jobs will be provided in that community for this particular project. And now the question would be, how do we use such, as part of our messaging before a project is there? How do we use such to ensure that the community itself gets to appreciate and own the development that is going to happen? Because I can tell you, some of these guys, they are these forums that are all over the place, and communities are led to believe that these forums in others, there are others that work, I want to believe, but in other environments, they are made to believe that they work for them. They are there to represent their interests. We are here to make sure that you get the benefits, the economic benefits from these projects, because in reality is that you would find situations where there's a company chair from another place comes in, it comes with many workers. Then it's easy for whoever who's this construction mafia to agitate the community that there are these projects and we are here, you are not working. But how do we use these as part of messaging, engagement with the broader stakeholders in the community around these projects? Well, I think that in a way would assist. Now I hear in other spaces, those who are employed in projects through these forums have to again pay the very same forums out of what they get as their remuneration from this work. So I just wanted to get a sense of how do we become innovative, because now we're even starting to spend, Minister, huge amounts that the department could have used for something else. And I can imagine the risks that you were talking about, the budget cuts that you were complaining about. So that's just the question that I have. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Member.
Okay. Can I just add to what Member Kama is saying in terms of the mafia?
No, Sabtra. Continue.
No, I'm just going straight to the minister. Was Minister, I've also listened to SAF, I think a few weeks ago, about this particular phenomena which is happening about this construction mafia, and specifically it was dealing about KZN, and it was, the stories that you heard there, it was very, very, very interesting. And since it's been happening, it's happening here, it's happening in KZN. So when you meet with the national minister during your May engagements, has it been discussed? Because at the end of the day, we need to deal with this thing, because it's impacting on the delivery of our programs and what you want to achieve. So I would just want to know whether you have dealt with it, when you, as a province and with the national minister, to say, how are you going to deal with this particular, problem? Because not just a Western Cape problem, and it's worse in other provinces. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think from my side, the question, the first question, it will be the target setting when coming to the EPWP, lashing on the EPW. Target setting from your responsibility, how do you qualify or quantify as you are the coordinator and as you allocate for that responsibility? And the second one, it will be the alignment of the department and the municipalities when coming to the infrastructure, and looking at the what we have identified in the Standing Committee of Local Government with the capacity within the municipalities and looking at the financial climate of some municipalities that really they are struggling. Whilst you are, as the department, will have to implement some of the projects, provincial projects, as in a municipality, surely somehow you'll find that there is a where municipality have to take a responsibility for it. Your Afrikaans and English came at the same time. Municipality will have to take responsibility. Now, when you go to a municipality like your Cederberg, and then you'll find that there is a project that you have to implement, but that small road on the side there, it's not your responsibility, and they have to implement, and they are struggling financially now. How do you, and I'm talking about the worst case scenario, Cederberg, when coming to a municipality that is not the worst case scenario, how do you make sure that your metrics for that municipality, for you to say that I'm implementing, and then municipality also agrees that I'll do that? Or even though you'll find that municipalities that will have the money, but capacity of the skills within municipality will find that it's not there. Now, how do you interlink to have that ecosystem of the project to run and not have a certain percentage that is delaying you because municipality doesn't have the skill? Now, how do you make sure that target setting also talks to that there is that intergovernmental relations coming to sharing of the skills and everything? And the third one, it will be the private partnerships. So on the private partnerships, and you talked about maximizing in the social benefits. So I want to find out, how would you also qualify or quantify for that to say, because you mentioned this your goal as a department's goal, how are you going to say I've achieved in the private partnerships and gauging the social benefits of how do you see that for this financial year I've achieved for the social benefits? Is it with jobs, or is it with what else that you add besides the jobs when coming to the social benefits within the communities? I think for now I will ask that three and then I'll come back to another one. Over to you, Minister.
Okay, Chairperson, I think 90% of your questions I'm going to delegate through to the HOD, and she will further self-delegate accordingly. But there's just three things I do want to focus on, because as much as I'm a member of the executive, I'm still a member of this provincial parliament, and I need to exercise my oversight actually more than just being a member of this parliament. And something that has been a pertinent, repetitive issue, because I visit every district 3 to 4 times a year. And the reason I do that is to see the reality of what my portfolio is dealing with at local government level, to better understand the hindrances, but also why in certain communities we are seeing a high reluctance of participation or distrust when we implement some of our programs. And one of them is EPWP, I must be honest. Now, what bothers me is, as much as we have a coordinating function, as provincial minister, I must still sign off on these EPWP plans, which speaks to your issue of target setting, which means there is a level of accountability that vests with me. The abuse of EPWP has been a phenomenon discussed for many, many years, but nobody is doing anything about it. EPWP still have ingrained institutional and procedural flaws. You can't trust their data, and this isn't me saying it. At MINMEC, ironically, we discussed EPWP and the HOD was there. No province can give you accurate figures because the systems are not fully integrated. Nobody can tell you, if you look at the EPWP rules and regulations, for instance, only one family member per household must get a job opportunity for specific periods. What we are picking up, and even in our province, we are not exempted. You'll have one individual working forever and forever and forever on EPWP. And there's thousands of cases like that in the Western Cape. And that ultimately puts councillors in a difficult position it puts all of us here in a difficult position because, but Minister, you sign off the plans, but you only coordinate. And at one of these sessions with the various districts, it's becoming quite pertinent that it's now being utilized as a political tool. And I have seen this with my own eyes. I mean, I was at the one by-election chairperson, and I actually called it, what's busy happening here? Because these people are at an e-center, I won't give you the municipality's name where I was, and the premiers, all this. People were being recruited and payment sheets were being uploaded and sent to province for verification for payment on a by-election day. So I know exactly when I hear these complaints and unhappiness about accountability and targets, we have seen this. So I actually did ask the national minister, and I'm going to write the national minister a letter before the end of this month to ask in my province where I'm expected to defend our targets, to defend our opportunities that we create, because EPWP is about the number of working hours, the equivalent of the number of job opportunities. That's the way the formula works. To actually ask for an audit of all our municipalities, to be quite honest. Because for me, you can't go to 25 municipalities, including in the city of Cape Town's jurisdiction. You hear the same universal complaint the whole time. Irrelevant political affiliation, I must say that. It's a massive concern because the intention of that program is very noble. But what we tend to forget, EPWP is supposed to have an exit strategy. It's linked to the Department of Labor. That has not been happening. When you exit the program, you're supposed to get a form of a CV. Built into the EPWP program is training, which at MINMEC, they also had to acknowledge when in phase 1 and 2 of EPWP, provinces and national could monitor what training was being done. It's not being monitored anymore. It's accredited and so forth, because a portion of EPWP at local government level goes to PPP or clothing and another portion for training. Why are we not measuring this in? Because the intention is you must exit the program, assist you with the CV, and there you go. Why isn't this happening? Why is it that we are keeping individuals trapped in the cycle of a 3-month contract, a 6-month contract, and with version 4 of EPWP, it's now a bit longer. And certain municipalities are paying the maximum EPWP stipend of 500 Rand a day for one person. How can that be? But we only coordinate. And when I am confronted, because people expect, because some of our community leaders, they know I sign up on these business plans, then I must be honest and tell them, look, according to me, this consultation happening at council level. You appoint officials that are supposed to be engaging these communities. I'm sorry for expanding on this, chairperson, because it's now part of your portfolio. You will be confronted with this when you go out to communities, like I have been for the last 2.5 years. It's a very difficult space, and the fact that it's a problem in all 9 provinces, but nobody can give you the solution, which is why I'm going to write to this national minister, because I want to do a verification of our data in the Western Cape, because if we can find and trace abuse of EPWP, then we must deal with it. Why is it that in certain municipalities in our province, irrespective of who governs it, EPWP is in the office of the mayor? If you read the EPWP guidelines, it's not supposed to be like that. Politicians are supposed to be so far away from that program. But in reality, it's a different thing, Honorable Chairperson. And that opens up the gap to Member Kama's question about the construction mafia, or the construction mafia or the extortionists. That ultimately has opened up the market for them. Because you can see government as a program, but it's only the same people benefiting the whole time, to be quite blunt. And that's where they have seen an opportunity. I have seen this in human settlements. I've seen very small attempts in roads, but it was stopped abruptly by our CFO. So I've seen that what government does with good intention has opened up a secondary illegal market. And as Member Kama rightfully says, in Afrikaans, they want the pond vlees, they want the cut. That's the way these mafias work. So indeed, we do need to look in the Western Cape at EPWP, but as much as we coordinate, we shouldn't hide behind the word coordinate. Because at the end of the day, I still sign off on it. We have provincial teams and district coordinating teams that are supposed to monitor this. and they are dependent on an effective local government that are supposed to monitor this. EPWP is an electronic integrated system where you log who works in EPWP, where you get their contracts in place. That's even in roads, we do that. So it's the architecture is in place to do what we want to do, but why is this not happening at the coal face? That does the implementation as you put it. Chairperson also and members, my final point, interventions at municipal level. Now, the reality is, and we've seen this in the one space, which is branch human settlements, to a lesser extent in branch human roads, and to even lesser extent in public works. But if you do not have a functional local government, if there's an unstable council that appoints incompetent individuals, like I said to the standing committee when I was here last, it has a vicious effect on our cycle, on planning, implementation. When municipalities that do not have the competency in supply chain wants to do the supply chain processes because they want to capture certain things, that is the reality. I actually pity my colleague at local government. But the problem for us, Honourable Chair, and we have been through this in human settlements, where we actually needed to ask a council to make a decision. If you can't do it, there's the intervention side, which we've tried and it worked. It's to ask them, just take a council resolution, ask our assistance, because really, we can't have a multi-million rand project stuck because of council decisions, and then I must come on account and the HOD must sit next to me why we're underperforming in human settlements. But nobody asked the secondary question, but what happened in that specific municipality where you didn't perform? So, Madam Chair, that's just my inputs regarding this, because I take accountability quite seriously. You are holding me accountable. And I must also exercise oversight over your accountability as well, where I am tasked to do so in my executive position. And it's not easy when your key role players beyond the legislature are not playing their part. Are we talking about partnership in the Department of Infrastructure? Partnerships work both ways in all three spheres of government, for me, and the private sector, and the NGOs and NPOs. But we will all come back to the same point. How do we ensure proper intervention within the legal framework where it matters the most at the moment? It's local government, where almost 80% of your local governments are failing or are at an advanced stage of failing. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Right, I'll try and do this a bit of an order in the way the questions were asked. So to start with the interim management arrangement approach and the refresh process, what has it been? So it has been one that has been led through from the Department of the Premier. And the approach, of course, is looking at organizational structures, and really what you would see if you take a step back and look at the organization, and you can see it kind of from the slides from the programs, if what you've done is you've taken what was TPW and you've taken out the transport-related transport operations, transport regulation, government motor transport, and you've turned that into a department of mobility. And you've then taken human settlements, that was a department, and you've pulled that in with public works and with roads and EPWP, and you've now got a Department of Infrastructure. So the process for our refresh was looking at, and took some time, because of course you've got very noble intentions of wanting to create a single infrastructure department, pull all of these different pieces, because there's infrastructure.
Sorry, HOD,
Yes?
members, if you need clarity when response, because there's a lot of questions and I want you to understand everything so that we don't go back, you can raise your hand for the clarity. Okay.
So,
Sorry.
So within the refresh process, of course, the original intent of what you want to achieve in terms of vision of what the Premier has articulated around infrastructure and around mobility was not something that one could do within the time frame of 1 April 2023 when you need to start. That's why there was two phases to the programs. The first was to create the departments as a start. And you therefore have now the Department of Infrastructure and the Mobility Department. And the process then followed was through discussions, consultation, putting together, understanding what those shifts would mean. And when you start to think about needing to take the administration parts, the supply chain, the finance, the strategy teams from two departments You need to ultimately bring them together and figure out what are your skill sets, what do you have, what's the competencies that are there, etc. And then you need to split it apart now to be able to support 2 new departments. So the interim management arrangement was aimed at bringing those groups together in a single whole. We had originally indicated that ideally you want that management arrangement in place for a year because you want to be able to upskill. So for example, a team member coming from the Human Settlements Department understands and knows, let's say, procurement processes in relation to human settlements, but they may find themselves, when the whole thing is split, moving to the mobility department. So they need to understand the business of mobility, and they need to understand what it would mean to procure a tracking system, as an example. So because it's different, the kind of commodities that you're looking at are different. So the idea originally was that they should be together for a year. That means that they understand the cycles that they're going to go through. You go through all of the reporting, etc. When the process went through and the necessary authorization, the Premier took a decision over that it must be October, the end of October, not a full year. So we've had the teams together trying to, wherever possible, get a bit of the transfer of skills. It's also the fact that certainly historically in TPW, I can speak on because that was my area, we had certain management arrangements internally in place because we didn't fill all our support posts. We focused our COE money on the delivery teams, on the engineers, on the architects, and so on, which meant that in certain units, you didn't have enough personnel. You may have posts, but you don't have warm bodies. When you now need to split this out between 2 new departments, you don't actually have enough people. So the intention of the management arrangement was to be able to provide you with enough time to do that audit, to assess how many people you have across the different areas. And then if you had the COE, go out, be able to recruit the skill sets that you need and the people, fill posts, and then, of course, make sure the people are trained and split them apart. There haven't been job losses. So, because, of course, remember, within the government sector, there is no procedure to exit people. So anybody who can't be placed against a particular post goes into excess, but they don't lose their job. And in terms of the requirements with the unions, you are still required to do meaningful work and be employed to do something meaningful. So as a result, there is no job losses in terms of the refresh process at all. Now, the engagement then from the administration and the unions, the union engagement zone was then led by the Department of the Premier with the Corporate Service Centre, because, of course, they've got the connection through from the CSC into the union processes. So they presented what the plans were, what the approach was going to be, etc., in the consultation with the unions, and then went through the entire process of the consultation with the National Department of Public Service Administration, had to go all the way up to the President because the President had to sign the necessary proclamations, which are the adjustments to the Public Service Act and the schedules there to provide for the 2 new departments. So that's, I mean, we can spend hours going through the detail, but that's succinctly what the process was. So I'm picking up then the second question around the interim management arrangement and any problems regarding dissolution that may happen, that through your chair, Member Seleko asked about. There is a concern that the team does have that with the limitations around COE, that we're not going to have the opportunity to have been able to fill the numbers of posts that are necessary in order to make sure that you've got sufficient people, which then means that the 2 departments are going to have to keep some sort of internal arrangements and understand that there would be acting arrangements, or people are going to have to do other work or adjust the way the workload is structured between the teams. So that is, and that would be a concern irrespective of the management arrangement because of the limitations that we have around COE. So with all respect, it is a particular one because you now potentially have people in teams that don't have years of experience in terms of historical memory, but that doesn't mean that it's lost to the system. You can pick up the phone and phone a colleague in another department and ask the question. You know, it's not as if suddenly you can't interact and ask for assistance and support between departments.
For the organizational structure now, do you have to, or you are going to combine it in there?
for the department?
So the organizational structures that were consulted and approved provide for the administration structures across both departments for infrastructure and mobility. At the moment, with the interim management arrangement, there is an additional structure. Let me use the word. It's a theoretical structure where everybody's been put together on parcel against the Department of Infrastructure, and will now go through a process of splitting them and formally placing them, transferring the staff into the respective posts across the two departments. If that makes sense. Okay. So the two, let me try again. When the departments are created, you have an organizational structure that must be approved. And that includes the structures for administration, finance, supply chain, etc. So if you were to look at a piece of paper with the organograms on them, this is what is approved that should be in place. So you've got a structure with posts that are listed. Now, for the Department of Infrastructure, and you think you've got an organogram for that administration, those support posts, you've got an organogram for public works, for roads, for human settlements, and so on. You have got, in terms of process, the hot bodies that we had before have been placed and transferred into posts for public works, for roads, for human settlements, for community-based. The hot bodies that we had for the administration part have not yet been placed into posts for infrastructure or for mobility. All the hot bodies are sitting in a group together on a system listed, and for the sake of them needing to be linked to a department, because you can't have them floating in parcel just in midair, they linked to the infrastructure department just because they have to have some connection. Now, by the end of October, what we have to do is we've got to take that group and we've got to place them against infrastructure and mobility. So they then formally find a formal future home, if that makes sense. Does that kind of clarify? Yes. Correct, for bus and mobility. Yes, correct. So there's that transfer process that must then happen to be able to get people then under the management and control and so on of the mobility department. Nobody loses any job at all. Nobody has lost, nobody will lose. Okay. Then, Chair, so is there anything else on the management arrangement before I go on to any of the other questions?
Can I just check, Chair, as to what is perhaps the projected time frame that you'll be operating with this management system?
Through you, Chair, it needs to be completed and unbundled by the end of October. Then the next question, and to pick up also on Minister gave some inputs around the department intervening with municipalities not implementing, and the question around, can the department intervene if municipalities are not implementing? And I'm assuming you're meaning any infrastructure. Now, of course, there's different environments because there's different legal mandates that are attached certainly to the work of our department. In the road space, remember the roads branch is the Provincial Roads Authority, and they've got certain roads for which they are the roads authority, for which therefore through this parliament funds are appropriated and they are allowed to spend that money. They are not allowed to spend provincial roads money on municipal streets. So we cannot go and intervene just somewhere if a municipality knocks on our door and says help, because actually we can perhaps provide some technical input and some expertise and so on, but we can't take our money and go and spend it on a municipal street. Then we're not complying with what you have appropriated the money for. So In that instance, we can't just go and intervene if a municipality is not implementing. There are things that we are looking at, and there's one test case that we are busy exploring with the Swellendam municipality, who have approached us to ask for assistance from a roads perspective, where they acknowledge and note that these are streets, roads that are their responsibility. They are the roads authority. And what they're asking for is some assistance, but they're prepared to pay for it. Now, that's a different conversation that is being held then from putting in place a memorandum of agreement, understanding if we provide assistance and potentially capacity, can we do that, making sure that it's not at the expense of us delivering on the program and the priorities of the province? Because that's also the thing. If you go and you intervene and support a municipality, your own work is potentially not being done if you're directing your resources to the municipality. So in the road space, that is something that we are exploring with them and looking at drafting an agreement. We've got a particular project that we're saying, let's try this, see how it works, learn from it, and then that may become a model for future assistance and support. There are others where potentially there is in the road space where it is a road and the municipality is the road authority, but we are the controlling authority. Len, am I getting my terminology correct in terms of the proclaimed municipal main roads, where we subsidize and contribute and so on? And those are usually your main roads through the towns and things. And in that instance, if there is some need for assistance, and we're going to be doing a project from our side, there are rules in place linked to the ordinance and others that they can be requests made for the province to assist and potentially subsidize at 100% certain items and work that needs to be done. So there are some projects, if you were to think about Montague Ashton and others, as example, on the Kochman's Kloof program overall, that the contract went out, even though it was through Ashton, it was the contractor that we appointed, we managed, we ran through it, even though it was, the proclaimed municipal main road in that particular section. And you must correct me if I'm getting any of my terminology wrong, Len. So there are some areas where we can assist it, but within the rules. We are obviously very clear that it must be within the legal rules provided. On the public works side, there is less really from an, okay?
Yeah, just on a point of clarity, Chair, when you talk about roads, and yeah, what the minister has always said, unfortunately, I'm also part of local government, and some maybe my my line of questioning will also talks to local government, and we all know how our local governments are looking.
So remember, you said unfortunately you are part of, or fortunately.
So yeah, fine, Chair. Because it's a headache. So yeah, but what is important is we really want to see that where we can help, we are able to help. And when it's very difficult sometimes to be in a meeting when you say we cannot intervene, it's very difficult. And because what do we do as a responsive government when there is an incompetent administration, there is an incompetent council? What do we do? Because you must be able to see that year in and year out that certain councils put in requests in terms of the IDP for certain roads. But you'll find that 3 years will pass, but that council does not consider anything. But when you go to that council on the ground, you find the roads, the condition is appalling. What do we do? Because there's incompetence there, and unfortunately their lifespan is going to be for 5 years. What remedy is there for the end user at the end of the day for the department to also assist? Thank you.
I think before I hand over to Minister, the main question that we are trying to find out is where we have competency. And then we go engage with a municipality. And most municipalities, and we did that with some municipalities just a few weeks ago. they are vocal recently in saying, no, we don't have the skills. And then we are doing an oversight to the provincial department where we have the competency. Now, the engagement between the municipality and the province to say, where can you meet to make sure that the recipients of those services, they get joy in what we are shouting on the stages. It's where we are trying to find out where's the loophole? What is it that can be done? Because this is the problem that has been coming on for years. It's just not a new phenomenon of the municipalities, blah, 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 blah. It's something that has been going, but surely when we are out there, the communities, they see government. They don't know local, province, national. They just see government. Now, how do we communicate that what needs to be done and who is responsible without shortchanging the beneficiaries? Because municipalities, they say, yeah, but they give us money, but we don't have capacity. And then we come back and then we say, HOD, Minister Simas, yeah, you allocated the money. Yeah, we approved that budget. But we hold you accountable to make sure that that money is being used where it's supposed to be used. So that's where you come in, much as implementing agent is the municipality.
Chairperson, if I may, and the HOD can fill in on this, because the tighter the fiscal environment becomes and the more the level of incompetency rises, and you've just alluded to the local government level, the questions will be, how do we still deliver to our people? You know, the architecture of the way that the three spheres of government are structured was it, you know, you have certain responsibilities. If you do not have, we can help. But the question now is, how do you help? And the problem is that once we start using our own funds, then I also have a problem with it. Because you have the budget. And then what are you doing with your budget? If you know you're supposed to buy graders, why aren't you buying the graders? If you know you're supposed to be buying JCBs, you know, all these lovely terminologies I've learned in the recent while, where is your money going? You are employing a massive municipal staff structure, but they're incompetent. And I think through you, Chair, because once again, once you start engaging the full complement of all of our programs, you will be confronted with what I have seen for 2.5 years. People have, when I say people, I mean councillors and municipal administration have this idea of provincial government as this big brother, this bank that prints here in Cape Town and we can just distribute money at will. That is not how it works. That is the sad reality. And I think for me, as part of the legislature, but also as part of the executive, are we not at a stage in our country's democratic history where we need to actually ask the pertinent questions? Is the current model of governance really responsive to our people's needs when they see government actually as one? Because the legislation drives the way budget is spent. Now, roads to a certain extent, and you know, you can, you know, actually alluded to some of the solutions we're trying to find within innovative, creative, but also legal. But what some municipalities want us to do is downright illegal. I know sometimes when they see our yellow fleet and there's a flood, they think we can just hop in and help. The problem is, what if that vehicle breaks? Who takes accountability? Who takes responsibility? Because I must come and account to this legislature and I can't call the mayor to sit next to me. And that is where we are at the moment. And my biggest fear as a member of this legislature and part of the executive who must ensure that, you know, there's oversight, there's implementation of the relevant acts that give me my executive authority. That's my responsibility. That's my movability within that. And at some stage, one will need to ask the right questions, because the more we see failure, the more we are going to ask the same questions. And that is the big problem. Our province is not exempted from it. It's not so far the decay of local government's decline. But some of our municipalities are on par with what's happening in other provinces. And I don't talk about other provinces when I appear here. I talk about my own province, and I see this within our province. And as much as you want to help, the way the law and the architecture of the law and the budget works, It does not allow that. And I think that is what we need to ask when we go to local government, when we engage councils, when we engage mayors. You have a MACO member who doesn't even know how many roads they have. I mean, crying out loud, why are you the MACO member? Then resign. Sorry, I sound a bit harsh.
So let me add a few other points to what Minister has mentioned as well. So where we also must be careful, and what I've experienced is, yes, you're right, municipality says they want help, but actually they don't generally want help, they want us to pay, with all respect. Because as Minister says, they believe that the province is the big brother, got deep pockets. Our budget is by implication big in theory in comparison to many of the municipalities. But if you're paying for every other little bit, you're not paying for your own. And before we know it, as we stand, we sit with a massive backlog in terms of maintenance of our own provincial network. And each time we divert some of our funds to potentially respond and support or pay for something that a municipality is paying for, we are utilizing the money that's been appropriated from usually equitable share, motor vehicle license fee revenue that is appropriated for the provincial government's responsibilities. And while it may be harsh from a municipality perspective, they have their own revenue sources, however small it may be, but they have their own revenue sources that are aimed to fund their responsibilities in terms of the Constitution. And I think Minister's right that then there's a bigger question around the makeup of things. Now, if the province is, and we often then get the request, well, can we go in and do it through the district municipality? Can we fix something? Can we use our yellow fleet? And a point that Len makes and has just reminded me is that the minute we start doing that, we are impacting potentially on small local providers of services, machinery, equipment, and so on in that town or in that area. So you bring in a yellow fleet 10-ton truck, as opposed to which then the municipality thinks they're not having to pay for, because in theory it's paid for by the province. But what that immediately is doing is that maybe somebody in that town who's got a 1-ton bucky may need to have 10 loads as opposed to the single load of in a 10-ton truck. But that local guy who's a little contractor who's also trying to eke out a living suddenly doesn't have the work. So you have to also consider that there are other aspects to it. Where we've had municipalities, and through you, Chair, the point around how do you support municipalities from a capacity perspective, our Masaki Sizwe bursary program, we've interacted with a lot of the municipalities to try to ask them, well, what about if we then partner with you? And in partnering, we've got partnerships with private sector companies that are part of what we call the bursary collaboration venture for Masaki Sizwe, where the private sector partner pays 50% and we pay 50% of the cost of that bursary. And then when the person graduates, they go to that private sector partner. Now with a municipality, they can be equal partners, the same thing, that then ultimately we're carrying 50% of the cost of the studies. The municipality pays 50%, but then it presupposes that person is going to go, when they graduate, and go and work with that municipality. Many municipalities have turned around and said, well, they don't have the money to budget for the posts. They also then don't have the money to pay for the senior professionals that would be needed to mentor the graduate to be able to become professionally registered. So the aspect of linking back to municipalities about building that capability and capacity is as much a question about to what extent are municipalities funding and paying for the types of technical posts that they need to manage the assets that are under their control, be it roads, be it bulk water, stormwater, electricity distribution, whatever those kinds of networks are. Many of them have got director posts for infrastructure, from my understanding, but then are they actually properly capacitated and paying for that? Then just final point, if I may, on this is that, and Minister said, try to figure out different ways of doing things, and that potentially the conversation needs to be one about how, from a provincial perspective, do you pull the different departments together with the different expertise and put a package of support together for a municipality. That then maybe through some legal mechanisms and by implication with the approval of the cabinet, potentially then through the approval of the parliament from an appropriation point of view, a package of support is provided that then departments with their expertise come in to assist to actually deliver. And then one can argue that Provincial Roads isn't using Provincial Roads money to go and work on a municipal street, but it is money through local government that does have a mandate and has the kind of capability to provide financial support, but you're bringing in the technical expertise or the capacity from the Provincial Department of Infrastructure to help deliver. And then just finally, one example to talk about types of support is in the drought. So 2017 or so, if my memory serves me correctly, TPW went out to tender for municipalities. We actually went out and put in place a tender for municipalities to use to sink boreholes. And it was down into the Table Mountain Aquifer, if I remember correctly. We would never use it as a department. That wasn't our mandate, but we put in place a tender for municipalities to actually buy from, because one of their things was they didn't have the expertise to put the tender out. So those are different ways that you can support a municipality that the Provincial Department of Infrastructure or any other can put in place the kind of procurement processes and utilize our capability and capacity. Often municipalities say procurement is a problem for them from a delivery perspective. You can get the province to do it, that the municipality then kind of buys off or utilizes or participates from that particular tender. So that's also a different mechanism that one can utilize to try and support them. And we've had one, reasonable example before. So I was about to go to public works in intervening with municipalities. I don't know, it tends to be the same thing. Of course, public works has got less of an area in terms of interaction or stepping into a municipality's shoes completely differently from a public works perspective. Although we have had in many of our tenders or frameworks and so on that we have in place for maintenance, that we've had municipalities ask if they can piggyback or they can utilize or buy and utilize those particular tenders to support from a procurement perspective. And of course, human settlements, you well know that the framework within which, and ministers mentioned, that the province can and put in place on the basis that the municipality asks for that particular assistance and support. On the empowerment impact assessment question, that process and that tool is only used by us for our projects. It's not a tool that is used for municipalities and not necessarily one that I'm aware of that any municipality themselves uses for themselves. So it's not about holding them accountable or anything. It's purely our own tool to hold ourselves to account in terms of trying to improve on our delivery and achieve what, as the chair's mentioned, some of the socioeconomic and other kind of outcomes that have been identified through our own projects. That doesn't mean that a municipality can't ask for the guidelines and can't ask for training and assistance and so on. So those are available. Then the question around the strategic organizational thrusts in the private sector and innovation and capacity. I wasn't trying to imply that the private sector cannot and doesn't have the capacity to test things and innovate. What I was trying to say is if you think within the road space, we tested. Part of the problem around our gravel roads is the availability of gravel. You would see that you'll pick up a lot in the complaints about the availability of borrow pits for gravel. So what we then did is we went and purchased an inline crusher, which is a multi-million rand piece of equipment that generally a company from the private sector isn't going to go and buy and invest in if the thing's not really going to work. So it's with that type of example in mind when I say that we are able to take that, we can test it. It worked. We've gone and bought more of them because it's actually something that has been beneficial. So it's in that way that we can test, we can learn, and almost a little bit by trial and error from that perspective, if we had to, in comparison to the private sector. Then, Chair, moving on to program. It was the second question through you from Member Seleko around program 4. And the fact that as a program overall, the sub-programs are now it's a program itself within the department. I don't believe it brings any different risks or challenges from what it had before. The questions around construction mafia, land invasions, delivery, it's the same. And actually what it does is by bringing it in with the Department of Infrastructure is you start to perhaps be able to bring some of the benefits and some of the lessons learned and even things like an empowerment impact assessment that TPW did. You can potentially bring that in seed. Is it applicable? Does it work within a human settlement space? Are there benefits from that? So you're able to bring together, and other parts of the department are able to learn and understand and benefit from aspects that come through from human settlement. So I don't believe that there's anything new that gets brought in other than from because it's now a program in a bigger scheme of things. Then the minister's already touched on EPWP. One thing I wanted to just raise is that certainly, and minister's right, it's been discussed at the MINMEX and others, concerns around selection that even National has been working on, but has yet to pass through National Cabinet and EPWP policy. So it's been doing the rounds, but there's supposed to be an EPWP policy that gets signed off from National Cabinet, number one, and also work that the National Department has done around a policy for recruitment and selection. So they're also trying to, and are well aware of the concerns that ministers raised around interference, etc. And as a result, that is also something that from a national level, they're trying to put in place, which then becomes a requirement from a grant point of view, because then if you're not complying with it as a condition in the grant, National will be able to withhold the grant that's allocated. So those are things, and as ministers already mentioned, the conversation last week at the MINMEC was about exit strategies and linking with the Department of Labour, and the fact that those are questions that they're asking and that the ministers are asking of the National Department in EPWP. I can say that as a department previously, we had a community participation policy that we had put in place that then became a requirement from a perspective for the project being implemented by TPW to try to limit that point around influence for how people are selected for jobs, the requirements for a community liaison officer, etc. So we did also, and I think that's why when Minister mentioned, slightly less impact within our historical roadside and so on, because we had tried as a department to put certain measures in place. I was instructed in 2009 already by the MEC at that point, Minister Robin Carlyle, to put something in place, because at that point there were issues in terms of allegations and so on. So we had to put something in place as a department then. So in the aspects then, through your chair, Member Murray's disappeared out, but to pick up on her question around Joe Slovo and waste collection and auditing, our department doesn't audit where somebody resides versus what the criteria are that implementing department or body has put in place. That's that department or body's responsibility, not ours. Otherwise, we need a damn sight more staff than what we currently have, with all respect. What we have to do is, and there's that link back to the national system, which is around ID books, because that's the key thing, is around an ID being online and being registered, not about where the person stays in relation to where the opportunity is that's being provided. That is that particular implementing body's responsibility. And so any complaints that then arise do need to go back to the people that are responsible for checking in and oversight and so on in that municipality or that department. Remembering EPWP comes across different sectors, whether it's the environmental sector, whether it's the social sector. And so those things, then there will be departments, provincial departments, national departments, municipalities, SOEs, etc., that are all involved in that delivery. So the other point just to acknowledge is that funds that are allocated for EPWP, we do not allocate those funds.
My apologies, HOD.
Sorry, HOD, I had to step out quickly for a body break. I just wanted to touch base again. What was your recommendation on escalating the issue on EPWP?
Through Chair. So because we are not the ones, we don't have capacity, we do not audit. Your point through your chair was that somebody potentially resides in a different area getting the job opportunity in where they don't reside. That is not something that we have any authority or capability to check. So that needs to be escalated within that body or within that organization that's implementing the project. If it's a requirement. So remember, of course, that's also the point. Did that municipality or department put that in as a requirement when they went out to tender or when they sourced the labor? Was that a requirement that they put in place to say only people from area X will be considered in this particular up for these opportunities? If they didn't, then with all respect, I don't think that there's much that you can do about it. So it needs to be escalated within that organization. We can't do anything. We have got no contractual basis. We've got no ability from our side to be able to intervene. We can ask the questions and say that there's been complaints, but we don't have any legal standing.
Yeah, just to follow up on this. So I have escalated it to the sub-council, and the response I received was essentially that they did check. And I mean, the information is incorrect. I'm still receiving complaints from the community. So how further could I escalate it?
Well, through your chair, I would think you'd have to then take it all the way through. If it's within the city, you'd have to take it up through the layers within the city of Cape Town, and they would need to go and do an assessment of what the requirements were of their project versus what has been put forward. It doesn't mean that the work you see from an EPWP point of view, it doesn't mean that the work opportunity isn't valid. Because remember, you're requiring an ID, is somebody employed or not, and so on, those checks. But with all respect, it's within that implementing organization for it to be taken up. I've got no authority. I can't withhold money because I don't allocate the money for it. We don't have, unfortunately, any role.
I think another thing, member, the chairperson next to you, it can be one of the agenda points to deal with it from the local government, to call the city to come and get clarity when they implement that. Minister?
Chair, I think just to let on to what the HOD has said, the relevant MICO member that the honourable member can write to is Alderman Grant Tweak. His directorate deals with those appointments in the city of Cape Town.
There is, and the CFOs also just remind me, one does also have to be careful depending on the type of project and etc. as to what extent you limit the area from which you can identify people for work opportunities. And partly is that you're also wanting, if somebody's unemployed and they're just their address happens to be on the other side of the road of where you've drawn that line. I know I'm just saying one has to be very aware as well. Somebody's looking for work, somebody's jobless. Then moving on around holding the municipality to account, as I mentioned, we don't allocate funds. We don't allocate the grant that comes from the national government. They distribute that. And the targets moving, if I may, I'm jumping, I'll come back to one. But the question about target setting, we don't set the targets. We don't even set our own targets. The national government sets those particular targets across the provinces. So they split out the total amount that need to be generated for the country. They then split it out per province, and then whether it's provincial, municipal, and then break it down. It does connect back to the grant allocations, to your previous performance, and so on. But it's not something as a province that we sit and go, okay, municipality X, you're going to have a target of 5,000. That we don't do that.
Just to clarify, so if the national set the targets for that, also they attach the numbers through the, okay, thank you.
Then just to step back slightly as well, the aspect around the construction mafia, Minister spoke to that. One thing I also want to say is was our experience that construction mafia started to come to the fore, particularly in KZN, when the legal provisions and the National Treasury regulations were changed to stipulate a 30% provision from a kind of a subcontracting perspective. 2017, there we go. Thank you, CFO. And that then meant there was a perception immediately, or let's say an opportunity created, that there was a view of, well, I am now entitled to that amount of the project value. And of course, in an infrastructure environment, it is usually the case that there is subcontracting built in because of the nature of the work that needs to be done. You don't often have, for large infrastructure projects, that a single contractor does all the different types of work and has all the skill sets. They bring in subcontractors to do that part. And so you could actually find on a project that you land up with 50% of the value being subcontracted potentially, depending on the nature of the work. Or if it's a very specialized construction project, you may find very little of it being subcontracted because of what's being done. And that's certainly, from my recollection, is something that started to drive that construction mafia approach. And as Minister mentioned, it is discussed, and I am aware I've seen something even recently on one of the documentation coming from FOSSAD that it has even reached the president's table and so on in terms of discussions around construction mafia. And it is an item within the National Public Works and Infrastructure space as well. Then, Chair, I dealt with your first question, your second one about alignment with the municipalities and linking. I think we've touched on it to an extent around skills and development and intergovernmental relations. And then on the private partnership side of things, how do we quantify and say we've achieved the benefits? And there are a few things. Jobs, job opportunities, job numbers is certainly one of them. We don't just have, and if you go back and look at the APP, while the department is responsible to coordinate EPWP, and there's the provincial target that's there, we have got work opportunity numbers for roads, we've got work opportunity numbers for public works, and there are work opportunities and numbers within human settlements. On the aspects from a social benefit perspective, though, and even economic, because they are closely connected really in infrastructure. In the roads environment, what you look at and there are metrics where you look at user costs. So how much is it actually costing somebody to use the road network from a time, fuel, and so on? And those are analyses that are done and included in the road asset management plan, with an assessment that if you do not invest a certain amount of money into the system, your road user costs are going to go up, because potholes, poor condition of roads means that impacts on the wear and tear of your tires, fuel usage, congestion on the network, all of those kinds of things go in. So there are calculations. Those are not targets that we put into an APP because you can't actually put in a target on it, but those are metrics that are used to understand the kind of state of the infrastructure. We also then do, as per the Government Immovable Asset Management Act, facility condition assessments. GIAMA requires a custodian to do a facility condition assessment across every single asset on your portfolio at least once every 5 years. So we also then have an understanding of the condition of the assets of the portfolio of the Western Cape government, which by implication then gives you an idea of its performance and its ability to respond to the needs of the users. So if our condition is sitting generally, I think the general infrastructure portfolio is generally sitting on a B to C kind of condition index, if my memory serves me correctly. The health portfolio, because it's smaller in terms of quantity, is probably sitting more in the C, negative bottom level of the C, and across the education portfolio, if my memory serves me correctly, we're generally sitting in a D, because there it's about, you've got over 1,500 schools, and there are a number of them that need to be replaced. They're old kind of plunky schools and so on. So overall, that condition is relatively low. And you guys must correct me if my memory is failing me. So that is also a way to determine whether your portfolio is responding to the needs. And really when I was mentioning and Minister talking about the fiscal constraints, is that over time, your response and your ability to respond to the health and safety and performance standards of your portfolio is reducing. So you're starting to limit what you can spend on maintenance, and you're starting to focus on core things like mechanical aspects, HVAC, lifts, those things, making sure that the fire systems work because that's what you need to. But some of the other aspects we don't have the money for any longer in terms of some of the other type of maintenance requirements.
Just to take a step back a little bit, I just want to find out, like, jobs is one of the priorities. And when coming to private partnership, like you explained, that there's no target sets on that. But now, how do you make sure, how do you account when coming to yielding the job opportunities or the benefits of that private partnership, because you put it as one of your priorities for the within the department itself. Now, is it an extra or it's so? How do you go about it?
Sorry, then I misunderstood your question. I apologize. So in that instance, there are areas that come into the delivery of certain of our projects. So if we're thinking around the property side of things, that those are linked, not public-private partnerships in the traditional PPP sense, but private sector partnerships from a delivery. So like we had Conradi as a project, Founders Garden, Lilo. So they're your targets. You've got housing opportunities that would be coming into it. You would be looking at investment value. You'd be looking at jobs. In some instances, again, not a target, but you are potentially looking at, is there a residual land value that potentially the developer is able to actually pay to the province for that opportunity that is created? So those are things that are then measured project by project. There is also one, if we take an agreement that was in place with roads around a particular farmer grouping that came in, that was going to partner with us, and they put some money into it for us to be able to surface a particular part of the network, or they would surface it and actually hand the road over to us. So there are different types of partnerships that come through in the process, but they don't sit with, let's say, a specific metric in an APP because it forms part of the overall. Yes, it's over and above. Yeah. And Chair, I think I have covered it. The team may want to add anything into this. The CFO would like to add if you may.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to add that when you think about public-private partnerships in the context of the 2050 framework, don't have triple Ps in terms of a national treasury triple P model in your head. That's not what we're talking about. Okay, because that's when you're going to get confused about what's in the APP and what's here. Okay, so when we talk about it, we talk about structured ones like a Conradi. We also talk about unstructured ones like the farmer example. Let me make a completely different example. A couple of months ago, the minister and I met with a group of contractors. Small, I'm talking about grade 2 to grade 5 contractors. These contractors sits on our maintenance frameworks, and they were telling the minister every time that we get a job, a task for maintenance, however small it was, a roof repair some toilets at the school, we go to the school, we do the job, then we see there's a problem here, this is broken, and we fix it. Now we don't pay them for fixing the other thing that they saw that is broken. There's no target for that. But these people become our partners because they invested in the community. So you talk about social, then you have to talk about their corporate social responsibility, and not only in the form of money, in the form of saying, we're going to do work at this community, let's plant a garden at the school, let's engage with the SGB, let's do this and that extra for the kids. Let's put up a play park or that kind of thing. So in that context, you need to understand that when we talk about partnerships in the 2050 framework, we're talking about how do you go into a community and over and above what it is that you have to, by law, go and deliver. What is it that the community asks for? That you can leverage that delivery and add on something extra with the person that you get or the company that's going to deliver it there. So that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. So I just wanted to make that clear so that we don't move into the triple P territory versus your Conradi. We're talking broad partnerships.
Okay, Erin, very much. Any other official wants to add? Okay. Now the members, any other follow-up? Now I want to give the minister the case study that we had recently. And then with all that you have said, don't be worried. Now, we talked about the skills and I think it's going to help us, the case study that I'm talking about. We get to a municipality, allocation of the funds to build the houses. A certain portion is left, a very minimum portion is left. The first financial year roll over, and the municipality leans on some of the issues that it could have attended to, or expectations, I think, from us was that is a done deal, but that didn't happen. Now there's going to be the rollover. I think they applied, or is that is going to happen? Is is it the Joe Slovo in Tievateslov? 48 houses. In that case, who has to take the responsibility? You allocated the funds already for that to happen as a department. That project should have been done years ago. So there is a municipality. So we said at the standing committee, the municipality has got the responsibility taken, and they came with the new talked about the EIA that was not there, but it doesn't make sense to us because already you initiated the project. So that means that was in place. And we went there and they told us that no, by June, the houses will be done. We went there, nope, nothing there. And they say, no, we were waiting for the EIA, and because it was in the file and. Now, the money has been allocated that this is for those 48 houses, and that hasn't happened. Now, that is a case study of somewhere of everything that has to be accountability and monitoring, and now in that case study, how do we close the taps to the loopholes that maybe you can identify in there, starting with Minister?
Chairperson, I know exactly which municipality you're talking about because you let it slip accidentally there. And once again, I look through the lens of my responsibility, and the HOD can respond or delegate accordingly. Chairperson, I think the problem and concern I have is that where we do not have competent municipal administrations, and my department through the branch human settlements engages these municipalities more regularly than they actually used to, because we do pick up concerns. And, you know, we try to do interventions, we try to give them advice, let's lose your 48. That 48 has been coming on since my term of office started. Let's be quite honest about it. At this stage, we even need to redo the tar roads, and you need to redo the sewage system because it's been standing so long. Just as a rider to your case study. At some stage, you know, we will have to take our funding and reallocate it to another project, because how do myself and the HOD come and sit here, knowing we were here last year, knowing we were here after I tabled the budget, and that municipality hasn't moved an inch now? People may call it tough love, but why must I withhold the delivery at one municipality because I'm still giving the one municipality a chance? But because they've had 2 MMs in the last 3 years and they've had how many housing managers, I can see nothing's going to happen there. So that's just my point of view. But I think we are at that stage, given where the fiscal environment is as well for our country, and it will have an impact on our delivery capabilities. It's either you can't or you can't, or you can't or you can. We plant and then move on and relocate it to another project. That's the reality where we are. Actually, Tiva?
Chair, so my assessment of things and coming into human settlement space is new, obviously having a look at it from perhaps with fresh eyes, is that it doesn't appear that historically human settlements follows what we've come to know and implement in the infrastructure delivery management system. So that's a core system within government, the IDMX, that goes through your planning gates, and there's certain gates, right? Planning, design, tender, in other words, your procurement process through to implementation. That is the stock standard process that is implemented in roads, in public works, etc. And so what that means is that you don't start putting or even transferring money for delivery in a year when you haven't even got procurement sorted out. Procurement happens before that. There's almost a perception that planning, procurement, and delivery must all be happening in 1 year, and that's the year that the money happens to be allocated. But that's not how infrastructure works. So there perhaps needs to be some small amount of money for planning purposes, sure, bit of money just to keep the thing going. And then when it gets to delivery and you're ready and you've got the procurement ready, that's when you would be transferring the funds to the municipality for the delivery to happen. So you're then not sitting with money being rolled over from year after year, because all the gates that you need to are in place. You can hold the money back if there's a problem with procurement, potentially. Sometimes your tenders fail, you don't get a competent contractor, and then you're not sitting with the money in the bank of the municipality yet. So there are procedures from a general experience of infrastructure delivery that I don't think have necessarily been embedded historically. And so what Minister arrived to in 2019 is this process that you've now got to slowly but surely try and unbundle and get the projects into that cycle of planning, processing, tendering and delivering. If in this instance, of course, well, not the specific, but from a case study perspective, I do believe that one needs to also realize and understand that when you're looking at infrastructure and planning through delivery, because they are multi-years, you need to be looking literally at a program that runs for 10 years. And you need to be budgeting like that, because the minute you commit, you can't suddenly take the money away when there's a contractor on site and because your budget's cut. You have to be able to realize what you push for, what you bring forward, what you push back as your budgets adjust in the time frame. And that's something that certainly the roads team have been very good at over the years. And if you were to look back that historically in terms of spending their budgets and being able to respond to that, it's because you're sitting with this kind of 10-year horizon and you see what's at what point in the process. Now, within the roads team, they have had experience themselves of where we would allocate, and you would have seen money to go to a municipality because a municipality's got a project that they're going to start on a municipal made road, and we've got the subsidy. So our allocation, that would go to them. And you would find that potentially at the end of the year, that subsidy hasn't been transferred because the municipality hasn't got their act together. So it sits as an underspend on our side because we haven't transferred it because they're not ready to spend it. So we then have to come to this parliament and explain the underspending here, rather than showing it as having been transferred to the municipality, so it's out of our books. But it's not going to help anybody because all it's going to do is sit in their books and then you have to go through the rollovers and so on. So rather, we ask for the rollover in anticipation of, or if there's a problem with a project, you then put it out to year 2 or year 3 or year 4 in terms of your allocations. So that for me is a mechanism that I'm sure over time and with the merger and the bringing together in a Department of Infrastructure, one can hopefully start to bring some of the other elements of infrastructure delivery and some of the lessons that have been learned over the years to help to streamline some of the programs in the human settlement space. There may be some other points. I don't know if CFO, if you want to add anything, or Labika would like to, but certainly that's just from my completely new look at it.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So for me, if I look at it and I take my infrastructure experience over the past 20 years, then for me, the first thing that I would do is put a rolling infrastructure program in place, and it has to be at least 5 years per municipality. Can't just be, if we take how long it takes to deliver, then at least a 5-year view. Because that allows you to understand what are the type of projects per municipality that you can have ready and put on the shelf, so that you can start almost lobbying for incentives, for incentive grants kind of allocations. Because at the moment, huge amounts are being given back to human settlements, to the National Department of Human Settlements. And for us, this is one of the key things that, okay, I always have a problem if we need to give back money. I always want more money, not giving back money. For me, I like get anxiety attacks if we're saying we need to give it back. So for me, that's one. Then if I think about it, for me, we have to have a complete emergency, completion, and framework implementation contractor groupings in place. Bought, signed, sealed, and they sit there. So when you need them, you just go and issue them with the assignment and say, now you move. Not wait until the thing happens and now you put it in place. Because the rules allow for it to have it done, to buy it, to put it there, that kind of thing. For me, this approach is relevant and applicable both in a provincial context and in a municipal context. So you asked early on, what are the kinds of things that we can do for municipalities? That's something that you can do and put in place on behalf of municipalities. Then capacity capability assessment per municipality on a database so that we understand it. Audit that undertakes and generally says, okay, so if there is a capacity problem, what are the alternative delivery mechanisms in that space? Because that's a question that you have to then answer. There are different models on the table. And then I would go and say, now that we know this, have a strategic procurement strategy per housing program, literally per municipality, because their issues are different and their capabilities should be different. Those are some of the things that I would say I would put in place.
Yeah, just a quick one, just to ask now, if you have to have the, what do you call, the project implementation management system, and also municipality have to have that. And talking about the capacity being of skills in the municipalities, are you not standing to have a risk of allocating just to municipalities that already are advanced? The others will be shortchanged because there's no capacity at all in those municipalities? Or you are going to, what you don't like, be the big brother to those municipalities to make sure that you assist them in implementing the projects?
So, Chair, that's why I'm saying if you have an assessment and you know what is the capacity or capability gaps, then you design a solution that's particular to that municipality. Not this is the stock standard thing. Now you go and everybody implements this one thing. It doesn't even work in province. It won't work there. You have to say, what is it that is supposed to be there? Do they have it? Do they have all of it? Do they have none of it? Because your solution needs to cater for that problem. Because otherwise, all you're doing is you're just creating a different problem as to why they can't deliver.
Thank you very much. So you're going to share with us your diagnostic assessment tool for each municipality before you allocate them the money for the project, Minister?
Before the Honourable Saleko comes in, local government does annual assessments, but it only goes to a certain point. Now, what the CFO is doing is going much, much deeper. Given that we know the condition of the infrastructure of each municipality, we know the condition of appointees and the level of appointees, that's where local government report stops. But as you can hear in all of our responses, as much as we are infrastructure, the way that cabinet is functioning, we are functioning outside of a silo mentality because we do realize we need to work together for infrastructure to work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I come to you, and let me get Member Seleku.
No, Chair. Just want to, if in an ideal world, what the CFO has said was going to work nicely. But that has been the frustration for me as well as a councillor, that in terms of the human settlement, that you've got more than one program. But we've always been focusing on BNG, most municipalities. We're chasing targets. And we would also, that on its own would also increase the indigent percentages of municipalities because BNGs are mostly subsidized. That's why we'll find most municipalities are not financially viable because they are chasing targets. And that is another something that is also contributing to that is what the minister has just said. Because the issue of intervention, we are limited as a provincial department to dictate to municipalities. To make an example, Chair, is you go to a municipality where there is a fully fledged expertise in terms of the component of human settlements in a municipality. And then within a year, there is new people. What do you expect to happen? How does one fix such things? Because municipalities appoints people to head their human settlements departments with no expertise, but they still continue appointing them. And then I really don't know how the department can assist, because in some municipalities, they view the minister as an enemy because the minister is honest. But I need to be honest, because he's honest, he's telling them where to get off, because it's impacting on him as a minister in terms of his targets, whether he's going to meet it or not. And I feel that in some instances, our municipalities are not actually assisting us as a department in terms of delivery. We are not saying appoint Maseko because we like Maseko. We are saying appoint Maseko based on the expertise, because so that you can deliver what we want you to deliver. But unfortunately, there's a lot of challenges in terms of human settlements, and there's those that still feel that human settlements is an unfunded mandate and it's not fully capacitated. And those are the challenges that are there. They persist there. And it will never help us achieving our targets if we don't deal with those issues. On a local government level, maybe one have to have an honest discussion on the function itself and how does one capacitate that particular function. If you all agree that it must be a funded mandate, it must be capacitated, then we are able to go there. Because if we really want to do something properly in terms of human settlements, we must be able to have the expertise. Unfortunately, we don't have expertise in local government because some mayors feel that it's an unfunded mandate and they're not going to waste time investing in terms of capacity in those departments. Now, that responsibility will come to the Department of Infrastructure, where we have to second individuals. When you second individuals there, then there is no cooperation with them in those particular institutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we just came back from trying to get the fact finding within municipalities with the audit outcomes, and we just found a conundrum facets of the problems in municipalities that the chairperson of local government is very passionate about trying to have the solution. And I said to him that he needs member Christopher Fry's dad sometimes for the community dynamics, because they can pray on behalf that dad must have. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Chairperson. Maybe just a few comments to make brief comments. When migrating into the Department of Infrastructure, human settlements is having to operate on the former TPW's platform. So in terms of internal challenges for the short term now, there's still some acclimatization that must be made in terms of transitioning and human settlement systems up and running inside of the DOI. Having said that, there's a few structural problems that I have a much better understanding in terms of human settlements and the target setting in the APPs than I did a few months ago. In the rollover coming into DOI, human settlements had a rollover from the previous financial year of just over 200 million. So money wasn't lost in the process, but it's rolled over. And having said that, it is a huge rollover, again, with some complications in projects where there may not be expenditure. So going forward, that needs to be addressed, because we will not have the luxury of 100% rollover requests being awarded based on the pressure on the fiscus. If you look at the indicators in the human settlements area, and this is why over an extensive period of time of many, many years, there is almost under delivery. I've been in provincial government for 20 years this year. It is the first time as a program manager I'm responsible for indicators that are not fully within my control and because it's national grant funding. So the targets that are set there are not 100% the implementation of the department. It's a hybrid model where some projects are implemented by the municipalities, as you know, and some projects by the department. On both sides, currently, there's capacity. There's also capacity gaps inside of the human settlements branch in the Department of Infrastructure, which we are busy addressing with the HOD and the minister. And a lot of that is also around COE. We've had resignations, and there's also pressure on the COE, which is a problem that originated in the former Department of Human Settlements. So you're sitting with capacity constraints on both sides, more so overtly in the municipalities. And with the capacity constraints in the municipalities, we don't have control over that portion of the indicator that is sitting in the APP. So I just want to spend a brief moment on the indicators. Coming into this strategic plan period that we're in for this 5 years, the indicators that were set at the start before this 5 years commenced for this 5 years were quite high, and it was before COVID. And for each of the annual performance plans that we've been in so far, the indicators were never adjusted down. So it constantly looks like human settlements is not delivering. So there's two problems that compounds that. One is the targets were set very high 5 years ago and they were never adjusted down. And then the hybrid model of some part of that indicator being within your control that you're implementing and some in the control of the municipality. So for me, that's a structural problem that requires redress going into the next 5 years in unpacking what is within the department's control. The one other example, and then that is even further compounded by national. If you look at title deeds, we spent 2 days in a workshop last week with national government, looking at the indicators for the next MTSF period. When they set the title deed targets for the 5 years that we're in, national instructed provinces on the targets set in the provinces' APPs. And what they did was from the previous 5 years, the targets that were not met, that was backlogged, they took those targets and they added it to the new targets of the 5 years that we're in now. So you're dealing with targets over a 10-year period that comes with a historic backlog that the systems are not set up to deliver on. There's one part that national has now said the AG has had a problem with every department in the province, in each province of human settlements, with regard to the national database. And national has now said that they have drafted a TRR and they're reviewing their database and they may end up with a new system. So in everything that I've just said now, there are also structural problems which earlier on when the introductions were made, there was talk of futures orientated and systems approach. If you look at a systems approach and within the current system, all we're doing is putting bandage on the problems, but we're not actually ripping the plaster off completely and saying structurally where's the faults and how do we need to address that. And it includes what the CFO said, which is looking at infrastructure as a package per municipality. So once you start doing that, then you can look at the whole system and how to start correcting it from a structural point of view. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I didn't want us to go that road at all, because I was specific with just the case study. Because some of the things that you are raising, it's things that are doable to me when I listen to you. And it's things that you say you're going to do, you not from national side. So we'll do the annual report, we'll get there. Let's just stick to this one, because if you are going to talk about what you mentioned of the the rollovers. I was specific about a project, and I know Minister understands where do I come from. There is a political challenges sometimes. There is community dynamics sometimes that is acceptable. But whenever I remember there was a issue one time in the I'll take Cedar because I come from there, was councillor there, that eventually we took a decision, a resolution that we said to the department, you are going to pay the suppliers, not the municipality, for the project to move, because of we are identifying as we interact with the municipality. So we are wondering why that was not the case when coming to this municipality for the project to move, that we don't have rollover. So that is why I say, I don't want us to go deep in. It was for us, as we do the oversight in future, identify the loopholes and what is it that can be done, because we are partners. As we go to the municipalities to engage with the municipalities, we also give them the ideas of the solutions of the problems that they can identify as problems. Like one minister knows, always I was passionate with that, they will say, our database, no, it's the province that's doing that. And I said, no, they don't know who's staying in your municipality. Why would you say the province? You send the list to the municipality or you load it now in the systems. So those are the issues that we are saying, that the more you give us information, the more we will help you, because municipalities, another thing we identify that there is an issue of communication that you have to repeat and repeat. We have partnerships with Salga now also to do repeat, and also them to go and do that repeat communication until we can access the junior staff, because as politics happens, the senior management moves out. But if you have that information, communication to the junior managers, at least they will continue with whatever that needs to happen for service delivered. So the annual report will come, all those challenges of the money that Minister Simon's department has to go back, you will have to tell us why. But for now, let's just stick on this for that. I saw your hand. Did you raise your hand also? Okay. Maybe I wanted to hear your voice. Thank you so much. Minister, I think that is all from our side. I don't see any hand. Before, let me give you, and then after for the committee, I'll hand over to Member Kama. Over to you. Conclusions?
Well, Chairperson, before I conclude, can I just ask the HOD to do our closing remarks and then I'll wrap up on behalf of the team? HOD?
Sure, thank you very much. And thank you through to you and to the committee for the opportunity. As I mentioned in my input, I'd like to suggest, and if the committee is open and has the time, I know you already have very full programs, that you may find certain elements of the work interesting, that you then want some particular briefings on certain aspects of it. And certainly the department would be happy to make itself available to do so, to deepen your knowledge and understanding in order to assist you further, definitely on a number of the programs. I think you'd find it not only interesting, but certainly beneficial, and for you, as you say, to be able to take back when you engage with municipalities and others. So the department is ready and willing to do that. Thank you very much.
Chairperson, from our side as well, to you and the Standing Committee, thank you for availing yourselves and requesting that we come and present this morning. I think a central theme which has come through, and even in your questions and our deliberations, is partnership, the competency level of each partner within that partnership. But I think a bigger question which impacts our delivery capacity as a provincial department is, how do we assist to an extent within the legal framework what's happening at local government? Because, like I said, in cabinet, we don't have silo mentalities. We tend to work together, and when we find solutions, we seek to find solutions together. And I think I do wish the Standing Committee well. I'm happy that through you, the chairperson of local government is also here, because 5 months into the new department, I think we have a clear idea where we are heading, but you can't build the future without retaining and addressing the current, I think, which is the balance that we need to do as a department. Thank you, Chair.
Very much. Member Kama?
No, thank you very much, Chair, and thanks for the opportunity. No, on behalf of the committee and the members, would also want to thank you as the department for the work that you do every day, and also availing yourselves to come and account to the committee. Really, the questions that we ask, we do so firstly to represent the communities that we come from, but we also want you to be better, you know, and ensure that we deliver. Infrastructure is a very important department in everything that happens in our provinces, because we live in this environment. So thank you very much. We wish you all the best in the work that you do moving forward. Thanks, Chair.
Mbada, thank you very much. And that is a wrap for the department. Thank you very much. And you can excuse yourself while we touch bases on some of the issues, the resolutions, honorable members. Thank you very much. Okay. See. Thank you very much. The details. They're moving out quietly. We can continue. Members, resolutions. Much actually. Have a fantastic weekend. Resolutions, any proposals?
It's possible for us. I think when we speak about EPWP, they mentioned issues of policy. Yeah, and there's a lot of discrepancies. You know, I think maybe we should have a briefing, maybe from the Department of Infrastructure, to specifically deal with the issues with the national department.
Yeah, the ecosystem of the EPWP. Now, because I just realized I'm blind, because I understand the department is a coordinator for all departments. And then the EPWP grant in the municipalities, it comes direct from national. Now we have to look the monitoring tool. Where is who's monitoring the concerns you and Member Mary was raising? So where do we go to get that? It's you, chairperson of local government. And then when coming to the province's side, it's me from the infrastructure. That's Member Kama, do you agree with me? For the municipalities, it will be accessibility of that monitoring. It will be through you, chair, on the local government side. But for the provinces, it will be the infrastructure, because it's a coordinator for all departments. Member Kam.
But what I wanted to, linking to what Member Selek was saying, because they spoke about legislative policy environments that need to be improved. So would want to get that understanding of what are these interventions that are required in terms of policy, so that even if we engage national or whoever, we're able to be specific and say we want this intervention. Yeah, we can do it like that.
Yeah, we can do that, Chair, but also, you know what, because there is no province that can actually report accurately, as the minister said, in terms of beneficiaries, you know, because that's why the minister said he's going to write a letter before the end of the month for an audit, you know, and maybe we should wait for that audit. Yeah, I think so, Chair. Because it's issues of policy as well that dictates how municipalities implement EPWP. But if there's uncertainty on national how or we should do your selection and recruitment, then every John Peter and Paul is going to use his different ways, and you cannot falter them as well. So let's ask for something in writing, Chair. Yeah. Kama, you were saying?
No, I think there's a lot they were saying around policy, Chair. You know, they even spoke about policy that National Department is developing, but has not passed at a certain stage. They even spoke around, I don't know what the HOD was saying around policy for monitoring the use of the funds.
So let's say we are going to request the EPWP framework policy from the department. So if we can have that, because there are some, so the framework, what are they using now? So that framework, if we can get, and also as member will ask the question of the framework from the municipalities side, then we get both of them. Can ask from the department. We'll have the meeting of local government very soon. In there, it will be the resolution from the municipalities. That I will ask it. I'm part of that. So okay, we start one resolution. Yeah. So, and the other one is the one that I asked the CFO for the diagnostic assessment tool that they are that developing or they are using present for the municipalities for the project implementations of what I talked about. They do the project implementation management system. So we want that project implementation management system that they do have now, that they're going to use for human settlement, but also they say they're going to do the assessment. So if they're going to do the assessment, we want to know they have to diagnose the municipality before they can develop an assessment that is specific for a municipality. But surely there is a template of the original template that is going to talk to the specific of municipality to municipality. So that is the one that we have to get to that. What are the questions that they ask? And I want us to get that because above this, there is the national policy on the matrix before a province can say municipality gets to be allocated the funds for a project. So it has to be they qualify based on those metrics, like the bulk services, like maybe they've applied for a MIG funding, like they talk about it 5 years. So MIG funding is being approved, they're going to implement the bulk services because the department is more on the top rather than below. The MIG funding talks to the underground and the department comes on. So those are the matrices that are coming from the national. So if they're going to do the implementation and they do have, it's above that is a foundation. Then above that, they say they will do this one on the infrastructure. So what are those? Because there's a new phenomena for them also from public works going to the human settlement space. Any other? Okay, those are the only two. Pardon? Kayla said we'll send the answer. She'll send us. Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry, in terms of the request for information, do we perhaps have a list of the provincial road network? So that we know what is in the authority of the. Have we received that? Maybe. also be added in the
Thank you very much. Remember, that is the resolutions, and that was the last one. Can we deal with the second on the agenda? We do have the consideration adoption of the draft committee minutes of the 11th of August. Member Select, you were there.
I move for the adoption, Chair.
Thank you very much, member. And member Kama was not there. I will second you. I was there, obviously. And that is all for today, honorable members. Thank you very much, Member Kama, for being here. Thank you, Shumi. Thank you, Masentle. And stop giggling also. Members, thank you very much. And Lizette, thank you as always. Do we still have the coffee? Yes. Yes. Thank you very much. So we will definitely make you proud. And members, go and fry. The meeting is urgent. Thank you.